Awesemo MLB Deeper Dive, of course, followed by MLB Live Before Lock. All kinds of baseball content going on the channel today. Do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. It really helps us with the YouTube algorithm. Keeps Adam and I employed, and you guys don't want to see Adam and I employed. We don't have any other skills. We have no other abilities. We have nothing else we could do. We are essentially people who know how to gamble and bet on sports, and we know nothing else. This is all we've ever done with our lives. And we've also talked about this slate already today. Adam, you and I did the strategy show together, and it's, a fairly similar show. So when we do these shows together, I always like to ask you, has anything really changed for you from what we talked about this morning?
Not really. The one thing that looks, I think, the most different is we've gotten a little bit more separation in ownership between Robbie Wright, Corbin Burns, and Zach Wheeler. This morning, we had like 30% each on Wheeler and Burns, and then 42% on Ray. Now we have Ray at 43.5, Wheeler at 34.7, Burns dropping to 25.3. That's just one thing that I'm definitely going to be paying a lot of attention to for tournaments, since I think that, you can kind of, you can nitpick on any of these guys who you prefer and the matchups and all that. But I think in tournaments, really, they kind of all have the same ceiling. So I'll be paying a lot of attention to who's not getting as much ownership out of that trio.
Yeah, and I think one of the other key things also when we talk about some of the offense that we're going to be going through as the show goes on is a lot of the chalk is still pretty much the same. The San Diego Padres picking up a whole ton of ownership. The Los Angeles Dodgers, their ownership's gone up a little bit since this morning. Yankees are marginally more popular, but overall, we're seeing a lot of the same situations we had this morning, in particular with the San Diego Padres. We also have a super chat right here from GB Kim. He wants us to say 3 positive things about the Mets. They're not the Pirates. They're not the Texas Rangers. And they have a subway system in the city they live in. There we go. Those are the 3 most positive things I've come up with. Adam, do you have any positive things to say about the Mets?
Peter Alonso.
There we go. Yeah, it's their owner has a lot of money. It's probably a bad thing that they're like kind of douche of an owner is now the face of the franchise on Twitter. But hey, listen, I've made out very poorly on the Mets this year. I bet a bunch of money on them before the season started. They were looking good to win the division. They don't anymore. But yeah, I have very few positive things to say about the Mets. I do not like that team whatsoever. But we do have right off the bat 2 teams that play in their division going up against each other. The Philadelphia Phillies at the Washington Nationals. Zach Wheeler on the mound for Philly. So right away, we have to start with him as one of the overall top plays on the entire slate. So really what I think we have to talk about here, it's not a yes or no with Zach Wheeler. Everybody knows he's a good play. Everybody really wants to play him. It's just in relation to guys like Corbin Burns and Robbie Wright. How much do you like Zach Wheeler?
Yeah, I mean, like I kind of alluded to at the top, I think from a tournament standpoint, it's, really in any format, it's really, really close. I wouldn't fault anyone for saying Wheeler's the number 1 pitcher or saying Burns is number 1 or Ray's number 1. For me in tournaments, it's just going to kind of come down to whoever's the lowest owned out of that group is going to be who I most likely end up preferring. I think that they project similarly enough where ownership will really matter. In cash games, I think Ray is my number 1 guy. I think Burns and Wheeler are really close in that regard. Like Burns is having the better year, but he's clearly got the worst matchup out of the 2. Right now, I think I'd be leaning toward Wheeler as the second pitcher in cash for me.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. Earlier in the day, I also preferred Wheeler to Burns, and now it's become even more so for cash games. Now we've seen Wheeler become so much more popular, where earlier today, actually, Burns was a little bit more popular than Wheeler. Now Wheeler's kind of a decent amount more popular, currently about 35% projected ownership going to Wheeler, 25% for Burns. So if nothing else, just to even yourself with the field, I think there's a pretty good chance that Zach Wheeler ends up being like 50% owned in cash games and Burns probably somewhere around the 10% mark or something like that. So with that kind of information in mind, I would just lean towards Wheeler with all else being fairly similar, other than obviously Wheeler, tougher matchup, but Burns maybe a little bit better of a pitcher to even that out. Nationals are going to be a team that is hard to get to as a stack. But on the other side of the game, Josiah Gray is going to be pitching for Washington against Philly. And one thing that I think Philly was positively leveraged when we did the show this morning, but maybe not quite as much as they are now. I think that their overall top stack odds have come up as the day's gone on. So we have the Philadelphia Phillies now 7.6% chance to be a top scoring team of the day. And Josiah Gray, while I think he's a promising young prospect, he's been fairly inconsistent, and that's to be expected with a young starting pitcher without a lot of experience. So taking advantage of some of this variance, I do like getting overweight to the field on the Phillies.
Yeah, we actually just got an update as you were talking, and they came back down a little bit, but 6.9% chance of being the top stack, 6.8% aggregate ownership. They look like a pretty good stack to me. There's a couple ahead of them that I will most likely get to before Philadelphia, but I would say top 5, maybe top 6 stack for me today. Probably not one I would get to in single entry or 3 max, but someone that I do expect to get to in 150 max. And like you said, it's just there's a lot of volatility here with Josiah Gray. He's certainly got the talent. He's got the pedigree. We've seen pretty good strikeout stuff from him so far at 26.1%, but we've also seen 2.53 home runs per 9, 4.74 xFIP. The Phillies lineup is a little bit weaker than normal. We don't have JT Realmuto today. We don't have Rhys Hopkins. We do have Andrew McCutchen back. So it's not quite as strong a Philadelphia lineup either, which makes it a little bit less appealing.
Yeah, and that's also something that you talked about earlier today, is you thought there was a chance that there could be some Philly guys that were in or out of the lineup, and that could impact how we look at Josiah Gray as a potential GPP option. He's only projected for 1% ownership on both DK and FanDuel, 8,800 on DK. Over on FanDuel, he's projected for also 1% ownership at 8,100. I think he should be higher owned in tournaments, but even with that said, there's so many good pitching options. I think it's going to be hard for me to really get to Josiah Gray.
Yeah, it's not a priority for me. I do think he's a little bit overpriced. He's in the boat where we'll talk about Julio Orios later and Luis Garcia. I think it's kind of a similar situation where I certainly prefer Herman Marquez at 8,500 to Josiah Gray at 8,800, but Marquez is also projected for like 27 times the ownership of Gray. So where you do have more popular bats and you end up in that price range, it's going to make sense just to mix in some Josiah Gray, hope he beats Marquez, and it'll give you a leg up on a lot of teams. But where I have lower owned bats, I'm going to be prioritizing Marquez in this price range.
Yeah, that's also something where, I mean, when we talk about offenses also, the Padres are going to be so popular today, and just because we've had a conversation about this late already, I know that you're not going to be particularly high on the Padres relative to the field. Neither am I. I don't feel I need to get massively contrarian in a lot of my pitching spots. I'm already kind of doing that with offense. So just give me the safer pitching options. I don't think I'm going to need to just force in somebody like a Josiah Gray with a whole bunch of variants and probably more downside than upside when I'm already not going to be playing the most popular stack on the slate by a whole bunch. If I'm already going to be playing, the Houston Astros in a lot of my lineups at low ownership, I don't also need to be pairing them with lower owned pitchers. So I'm going to be looking to differentiate more at offense than I am at pitching. So that's something that's going to really keep Josiah Gray out of my player pool. But because I am going to be playing a little differently at offense and I'm able to play more pitcher, more of the popular pitchers, that is what is going to make this next guy we talk about somebody who pops up in a bunch of my lineups. And that is Robbie Wright pitching against the Baltimore Orioles today. The Toronto Blue Jays are the biggest favorites on the slate right now. And Robbie Wright, I don't totally buy into his production to this point of the season, but he has tremendous strikeout upside. He has a really good matchup against the Orioles. So I'm not sure this is the spot where he's going to start to regress.
Yeah, exactly. We had talked about it this morning. You mentioned his BABIP being elevated this year compared to his career average. His left on base percentage is like 89% compared to a 76% average. So he has gotten lucky in those areas. On the flip side, I think he's gotten a bit unlucky in terms of power. His expected ISO is lower than his actual ISO. He's given up a lot of home runs, but he was playing his home games in Dunedin and Buffalo earlier in the year, which were both very, very favorable hitters parks. So I think, a little bit unlucky in that regard, but there's really no questioning his strikeout stuff. 31.6% for the season. Only a 6.3% walk percentage is a very big improvement for him compared to what he used to be earlier in his career. And it makes it so we can go deeper in the games. And then also, it's just running a little bit less risk of getting blown up since he's putting less guys on base. The Orioles do have some dangerous right-handed bats in this lineup. It's not like it would be surprising if really any of Hayes, Mountcastle, Mancini, Santander, Severino, did some damage to Ray, but he also isn't that expensive at 9,700 on DraftKings. He's a bit more expensive on FanDuel. I still think overall it's a good spot. 3.3 implied run total is lower than the Nats implied run total. It's lower than the Giants implied run total. And yeah, overall it's just, a good spot, even if it's not completely risk-free.
Yeah, and then as for the Orioles on the other side, I have a few leverage stacks here. It's not a hard team to get overweight to the field on. Everybody here is projected for 1 to 2% ownership. So with that in mind, I'm like 2-3x the field on most of these players. It's not really a vote of confidence for Baltimore. It's just there are a lot of popular offenses that I'm either cutting out or limiting in my player pool. And I just got overweight to the field on Baltimore. I like the leverage there. If you're playing 150 lineups like I am, it's something to consider. If you're playing 1, 3, 20 lineups, there's no need to roster Baltimore. But is this a team that you're going to be getting to at a small amount?
In 150 max, I think so, just because for one, Baltimore is projected to be a bit under-owned compared to their chances of success. But most importantly, with 44% ownership projected for Robbie Wright and reasonable pricing on Baltimore, they've gotten a little bit more expensive, but 3,600 for Severino, 3,600 for Santander, 3,100 for Hayes leading off. And then you have, one of Mountcastle or Mancini at first base. They're relatively inexpensive for the amount of power that you get. You're getting a lot of negative correlation with the field, which is really, really nice. So, again, not my single entry team, not a 3-max team for me, but in 150 max, I would expect that I get over the field on Baltimore.
Yeah, and then on the other side, Chris Ellis is going to be starting for the Orioles. We know all about how terrible the Baltimore bullpen is. And Chris Ellis, to this point, his numbers don't look bad, but he's made one start. He's pitched a total of 7 innings. So whatever. He has a 3.86 ERA, 3.83 expected ERA, but Zips has him projected for a 5.94 ERA the rest of the season. If you look at his minor league numbers this year, he has made 13 starts with the Tampa Bay Rays, a total of 15 appearances. In those outings, and this is in the minor leagues, he had a 6.32 ERA, a 6.07 FIP. So it's crazy for me to think that there should be any kind of expectation that Chris Ellis is going to be any good as a major league pitcher. And the Blue Jays were looking a little bit overowned when we did this show this morning, and they still are to an extent, except they're not crazy negatively leveraged. We have them with 16.7% ownership share, 13.3% chance to be a top stack. So it is a team that I'm going to be underweight to, but not quite to the same extent that I'm going to be underweight to a team like the Padres.
Yeah, and I think Toronto, I'll still get to a good amount of them just because they're not that far overowned compared to San Diego. And they do have one of the top chances of success by a pretty wide margin. It's kind of San Diego and Toronto at the top. And then there's a group of a bunch of other teams that are really close, but not really close to San Diego or Toronto. So I do think that, I'll be mixing Toronto guys in with some of these lower owned stacks that I like. Whereas San Diego, the way things look right now, I would expect to kind of just not really be getting there in tournaments and, hope that doesn't come back to bite me. Ellis is almost 29 years old. He's just now making, getting his first chance in the majors. Typically that doesn't speak very well to a prospect or lack thereof. He was in Tampa Bay's organization for most of this season, made 13 starts, 15 total appearances, and 57 innings at AAA. But like you said, 5.07 xFIP or FIP rather for Zips, 5.01 for Steamer. Just very, very unlikely that this guy's any good. Toronto has tons of power in their lineup. They're expensive, at least at the top of the order, which is probably why you will see them get less ownership than the Padres. But I think clearly one of the best spots on the slate. 6.3 implied run total, I believe, is also like a half run higher than it was when we talked about them this morning.
Yeah, and then if you look at some of the individual hitters here, there are at least a couple of guys. I think one you mentioned this morning was Lourdes Gurriel. If I'm not mistaken, you mentioned him as a decent contrarian option. He's only projected for 4% ownership, and he's on the cheaper end. So he's a way that you could both save money and differentiate your lineup a little bit. And surprisingly, well, maybe not that surprisingly because it's price point oriented, but Vlad Jr. is only picking up single-digit ownership. So the two least popular players in the Toronto lineup right now, Lourdes Gurriel, Vlad Jr., those are the two ways that I think we could stack this team to differentiate. Is that correct? You mentioned that you like Gurriel this morning?
Yeah, I kind of always like him when he's the guy left out really from the outfield. Like you're going to have more ownership going to Springer, Hernandez, and Dickerson, and Gurriel just kind of gets left off, but he still has power. He's still relatively inexpensive. So I do like using him in Toronto stacks.
All right. Next game that we have here to talk about, it is the Boston Red Sox against the Tampa Bay Rays. And this is a spot where you and I believe we're both going to be going against the grain a little bit, assuming that nothing has changed too much about your opinion from this morning. It is a decent enough pitching matchup, also a pitcher-friendly park. Luis Patino on the mound for the Rays, Nick Pavetta on the mound for the Red Sox. The key to this game for me, though, is not that I think either one of these teams are incredibly likely to be the top scoring team of the day, but neither of them are picking up any kind of significant ownership relative to how good these offenses are. Only 2.1% projected ownership for Tampa Bay, 1.4 for Boston. Luis Patino is a very high upside young pitching prospect. He has great stuff, but he's been really inconsistent. And Nick Pavetta overall on the year, he's also been a little bit inconsistent. So both these offenses have a lot of power, and they're teams that I think warrant being more than 1 and 2% owned.
Yeah, I think, the ballpark is really difficult to hit in. Both pitchers certainly have the ability to be good. Pavetta striking out about 26% of hitters this year. Patino has struggled in the majors, but he's one of the top pitching prospects in baseball. It wouldn't surprise anybody if this ends up being like a 3-2 or a 4-3 game. But both of these offenses have so much talent that I'm willing to bet on them when they're facing anything but, the very best pitchers and they're not getting ownership. And that's the case today. Pavetta has allowed so far this season, he's allowed 1.38 home runs per 9. Patino has allowed 1.54 home runs per 9. Pavetta has a nearly 4.5 xFIP Patino's at 5.33. So while both pitchers are talented, they're not, top of the line pitchers. They certainly are going to have their share of bad games. And you just have so much power, so many good hitters in the Boston lineup and in the Tampa Bay lineup, that as long as other people aren't going to go there, I'm more than happy to get to them.
Yeah, that's really the key here. And I'll ask you also, do you have a preference between the Tampa Bay and the Boston offense? I'll say for me personally, I am overweight to both of them, and I have almost exactly equal shares of the two stacked. But of these two teams, the one of them that you look at as a much superior option?
I think Tampa Bay looks a little bit better for me, just because I think the lineup's a little bit deeper. Like, you get Mike Zunino as a catcher option on Tampa Bay that has a lot of power, whereas Christian Vasquez has been really, really bad at the plate this year. Manny Margot offers you a $2,500 value bat hitting seventh. If you were looking for someone that cheap on Boston, you have to go all the way down to Jairo Munoz hitting ninth. So I just think Tampa Bay is going to give you a little bit more in the way of different ways to approach them. But I think mostly they're just really, really similar.
And the other thing to consider here about these offenses going lower owned is the pitchers are somewhat popular relative to the slate as well. Luis Patino projected for 12.5% ownership. Nick Pavetta projected for 13.8% ownership on DK. And then even FanDuel, a single pitcher site at 7,700, Luis Patino, 8.9% projected ownership, 8.2 for Nick Pavetta at 7,600. So there's a little bit of leverage to be had too in terms of stacking these offenses. And I think that's a pretty good way to go. But before we move off this game, the pitchers, do either of them interest you at all for tournaments?
I think they're both okay. I'm kind of surprised that they're getting as much ownership as they are. I mean, their salaries are pretty cheap, and there's not a whole lot of cheap pitching that you can really even feel remotely good about on this slate. The Rays do have quite a bit of strikeout upside. They have really good hitters, but they also have strikeouts in there. So Pavetta at 6,800 probably is a little bit underpriced, even though it's a risky matchup. The issue is just that he's 15% owned. So it kind of feels like the ownership is there, and you're not getting a huge edge by going to him. And then sort of the same thing for Patino. I think that there's less strikeout upside in Boston's lineup, but he is favored. Boston, I would say top to bottom, isn't quite as dangerous a lineup as Tampa Bay is today. And Patino does have really good stuff, but he's also getting double-digit ownership right now. So I would expect in 150 lineups, I get to some of these guys just because they do look like the best options in their price range. But like in 3-max or single entry, I doubt that I would get to either one. I think that they're just both projected to be a little bit over-owned compared to where I think they should be.
Yeah, so just for reference, the build that I have right now of the 150 lineups, if the slate locked right now of the lineups I'd be entering, it's at 4% Nick Pavetta, 4% Luis Patino, so well under the field, not real significant. And I'm overweight to both the Boston and the Tampa Bay stack, so I have closer to 10% right now. That would be well over the field, and that's a route that I think I'm going to be going as long as we don't see any kind of ownership go to Boston or Tampa Bay as we get updates. But as of right now, these are both projected to be pretty unpopular teams, as the pitchers are going to be somewhat popular. Next game on the slate, we do have one of the more popular pitching options on the slate. And already I saw as we entered the show, there were some people talking up a little bit. Herman Marquez on the road, pitching against Texas. Great matchup for him. And due to recency bias, I'm a little surprised that we're seeing quite this much ownership going to Herman Marquez. He is projected for 18% ownership on FanDuel. Over on DK, he's projected for 31.7% ownership, making him the third most popular pitcher on the slate. Marquez is coming off a game where he was fairly miserable against Chicago Cubs, ended up scoring negative fantasy points. It is a good matchup for him, but the question becomes, does his recent performance scare you at all, or does he bounce back today?
Yeah, I mean, the recent performances don't scare me. I think overall he's a really good pitcher. For the season, he has struck out 25% of hitters, 3.44 xFIP. His numbers have been even a little bit better outside of Coors Field, as you would expect. Strikeout percentage is up north of 26%. xFIP is a little bit lower. So, and then you're getting a great matchup here against Texas. I'm actually a little bit surprised Texas has a 4-run implied total. That kind of concerns me just because it seems weird. But I think that any risk there is, Marquez being 8,500 pretty much mitigates that. So I think where, typically I prefer to differentiate with bats because there is more volatility there. So where I do have lower owned stacks, I'll be more than happy to get to Marquez. Obviously don't want to play Marquez in the more popular lineups, but I think pretty clearly the top pitching option in his price range. Like, to get to anyone remotely as talented, you have to basically look to $9,200 Luis Garcia or higher. And then, the other options really in the price range is basically, Josiah Gray against Philly, Chris Flexen against Houston. I don't think either of them are particularly close to Marquez against Texas.
And then on the other side of the game, what are you going to be doing with the Rangers? Because while they don't have very good odds of being a top stack, they have a 22.7% chance on DK being the top value stack on the slate, which is by far the highest of any team. Over on FanDuel, it's a little bit different of a story where I don't think there's any real need to consider them just because it's easy enough to find value on FanDuel. But for DK specifically, we have so many batters that are cheap on this team. We've got the top of the order. Yanni Hernandez, 2,600. Nick Solak is 2,300. Adolis Garcia is 3,400. The most expensive hitter in the lineup on DK is Isaiah Kiner-Falefa at 3,900. So is there anybody here that you're looking to potentially get to as one-offs in lineups that don't have Marquez?
Yeah, I think Nate Lowe at 2,900 looks like a really good value. He's an above average hitter and tends to just go overlooked because he plays for the Rangers. Adolis Garcia has a lot of power. Don't really know why he's not more expensive. It's not that I think either guy's in a good spot, but I think that grabbing one or two guys in some non-Marquez lineups just makes sense because he's going to pull ownership and because they offer value. So it'll let you get really good one-offs, really good pitching elsewhere in your lineup. And, Lowe and Garcia individually, neither one is a bad hitter.
Yeah, and then on the other side, we're going to have Aj Alexey starting for the Texas Rangers. And from what we talked about Alexey before, he's a pitcher we just don't really have all that much information on in terms of he's young and there was no minor league stats last year. So he's 23. He's an unheralded prospect, but he's put up really good minor league numbers this year, sub-2 ERA in both AAA and AA. Probably been a little bit lucky to have that kind of ERA just because the batting average on balls in play has been really lucky. The strand rate has been really lucky. But on the flip side, the strikeout stuff has been pretty solid and is a positive matchup against the Colorado Rockies. In AAA this year, 33.3% K rate for Alexey. In AA, 28.8% for Alexey. So I'm going to ask you, have you found any more information on Alexey since we talked this morning about potential length that he might go today?
No, I haven't seen anything different. I'm, like you had said this morning, he's been stretched out a bit more as the season's gone on. He's been going around 5 innings typically in his minor league start. So that's what I'm expecting from him here, assuming he pitches relatively well. And at 4,700 on DraftKings, where you need 2 pitchers, I think that's enough to be interested. He's projected for about 6% ownership. The real question ends up coming down to how necessary is he in builds? Is there enough hitter value that you can stack good teams and then still not need to go to Alexey? But right now, for example, I was just playing around on DraftKings with a 5-man Toronto stack. If you take the top 5 guys on Toronto, or in their projected lineup, rather, Springer, Semien, Guerrero, Bichette, Hernandez, and then you go, let's say, Robbie Ray with Alexey, it still only leaves you $3,066 per player for your remaining 3. So that tells me that if you are looking to pay up for the best hitters from Toronto or, the best hitters from some of these other more expensive teams, and then you still want one of the top end pitchers, Alexey is going to come into play because it's not like you're going to be able to say, oh, well, I'll just take, Nick Pavetta plus Ray and then these guys, because that $2,000 is going to really, really limit what you can do elsewhere in your lineup. So I do think that, especially as long as he's not projected for much ownership, there is enough upside in a favorable matchup against the Rockies, given the strikeout stuff we've seen from him at the minor league level, that rolling the dice on a $4,700 Alexey is perfectly fine.
Yeah, and then on the other side, even though Alexey is somebody who I think we have in my player pool at a small percentage, the Colorado Rockies now rate out as one of the most positively leveraged teams in our projections today. Their top stack odds have gone up a little bit from this morning, and their ownership share has gone down. So looking at a 5.1% leverage rating for them, 1.9% ownership share compared to that 7% chance of being a top stack, it's hard for me to not prioritize getting to the Rockies to some extent, which is something I never really do when they're on the road. But it's a pitcher in Alexey who he's 4,700 and we have no clue what we're getting from him. While that makes him appealing for GPPs, it kind of makes the Rockies appealing too, because we really have no clue what this guy's going to look like making his MLB debut.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm with you. Normally I hate going to the Rockies, but we still have that same kind of grouping of teams like we had this morning, where there's 5 teams essentially between a 7 and 8% chance of being the top stack tonight, with the Dodgers, the Yankees, Houston, Colorado, and Philly. Even though I don't like the Rockies and I don't want to roster their hitters because they suck, it's still, nobody is good enough at projecting exactly what's going to happen in a baseball game that I'm going to look at the Rockies projected for 2% ownership and say, oh yeah, well, they're not good, I'm not going to go there. They're still going to succeed often enough that if that is their ownership, they're going to be underowned. Would I prefer that Colorado's ownership comes up and the Yankees or the Dodgers comes down? Absolutely. But I doubt that's going to happen because everybody else is aware that the Rockies have issues too. But, I think that they're still just going to succeed often enough, even with their lack of hitting ability, that they should be getting more ownership than they're currently projected for.
Yeah, and then talking about some of the hitters, and people are bringing up in the YouTube chat about how expensive they are on DK. And yeah, that is true. They are a fairly expensive team, but there are some cheaper spots we can get to at the bottom of the order. Sam Hilliard's a hitter that I don't mind playing. Primal Tapia is 4,300, and the Hilliard who I just mentioned, he's 2,500. Connor Joe, your favorite player who you've deemed a future MVP candidate, he's 4,500, which, listen, I don't love Connor Joe, but he's 1% projected ownership. That's a number in my current build I'm overweight for the field on. So how much does price come into play when you're looking at Colorado?
Yeah, I was going to say that is the one thing that will probably limit Colorado, at least to some extent for me, is that they are expensive. And so they're going to, at their prices, they're going to make it so I'm restricted at least somewhat in what I can do elsewhere in my lineup. And, obviously if I'm going to a team that is restricting what else I can do in my lineup, I'd rather be getting to just, some better teams I can pay for. So for that reason, I don't anticipate Colorado being like my highest owned team, but I do think they look like one of the most under owned and a team that I'll still be trying to get to.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too and by the way, almost every single individual hitter in this lineup, I'm overweight to, which is not hard to do when these players are all 1% to 2% projected ownership right now. And then we've got some guys like Sam Hilliard, Raimel Tapia that I don't think are bad values that are also fairly inexpensive and unknown. So with all that considered, it's a team that rates out positively for us. They're going up against a pitcher that I don't know what we're going to expect from. That makes them a team that I want to get to in tournaments, and also something we need to consider. When we have the San Diego Padres rated out as negatively leveraged as they are right now, 23% projected ownership share on DK with a 14.4% chance to be a top stack. Over on FanDuel, we have the Padres with a 18.2% projected ownership with 13.5% chance to be the top stack. I just kind of get overweight to the field on almost every other team, given that information. Well, not the Toronto Blue Jays, because they're a little overowned as well. But when one individual team is that popular and I'm trying to get away from them, it's just going to drive up my ownership for pretty much every other spot where teams like 1-2% owned. So give me Colorado today against Texas Rangers, team that, like you said, not my most used stack today, but certainly one that's going to be way more popular for me than the field. Next game we have here, it's a really weird pitching situation on both sides, and I just want to double check. Any confirmation that Jose Quintana will be starting for
Mike Myers is opening, just came out.
Okay. This keeps happening to us when we do the show, where we have no clue. Like there's a situation we're unsure of, and then it's like, what's the news? And it comes out as we're talking about it. So is Quintana still the long reliever?
Not sure.
Okay.
No, he is no longer on the Angels. So.
Oh, wow.
The Giants claimed Quintana off waivers from the Angels on Monday.
Okay, so that's quite a turn. So early in the day, we were expecting Jose Quintana to start. Not only is he not starting, he's on a different team now. So let me bring up Mike Myers' FanGraph page. I was not expecting this, but what are we expecting?
59 total games this year, no starts. In his most recent outings, 19 pitches, 13 pitches, 14 pitches, 10 pitches. He's going like an inning or two.
Okay, so we're going to be expecting a bullpen game here out of the Angels going up against the Yankees. And the Yankees doing something kind of similar where they have two starters that are going to be piggybacking each other. Corey Kluber and Andrew Heaney, both going to pitch a few starts. But first, let's talk about this Yankee side with what is most likely going to be a bullpen game for the Angels. What does that make the Yankees outlook look like?
It's tough. I hate bullpen games for the opposing offense because you just get different arms basically for every plate appearance. Guys are able to, max out their velocity and throw as hard as they can. And even bad bullpens now are typically pretty tough to hit because they just have guys that throw so hard. So I still think it's a high upside spot for the Yankees because they do have a lot of power in their lineup. They are pretty inexpensive, but like if you're comparing the Yankees to a team that's just like facing a bad starting pitcher that is still likely to go, 3 or 4 innings. For example, Toronto, I would still prefer a team like Toronto, their matchup to the Yankees, but still fair pricing, high upside spot, just a little, I don't like bullpen games that much.
Yeah, and let me just refresh because I think we might have a fresh run of ownership now. And the Yankees, the Yankees ownership has gone up quite a bit now, and we now have them with a 12.1% projected ownership over on DK with an 8% chance to be a top stack. Over on FanDuel, we have the Yankees 9.5% projected ownership, 7.6% chance of being the top scoring stack over on FanDuel. With this information in mind, I do not like the Yankees all that much. This was a team earlier in the day that looked like they were being owned a little bit more appropriately, but now that ownership's coming up, and the situation is arguably worse. It's not that Quintana himself is any great as a starting pitcher or anything, but it's a bullpen game. And I think that just that being the guys are going to be coming in and out, potential risk for pinch hitting for the Yankees, I don't know if this is a team I want to get to all that much.
Yeah, I mean, like I still think I'll be mixing in the cheaper guys that we know are going to be in the lineup the entire game. LeMahieu, Rizzo, Stanton, Gallo. Assuming that they start Aaron Judge. But from a full stack standpoint, I don't think I'll get to a lot. I think I do end up coming in under the field there and just still moving some of that. We had talked about having a lot of exposure to move around if you don't go to the Padres. Kind of the same thing here. You have teams with similar chances of success like Houston, Colorado, Philly, Tampa Bay, and Boston to a lesser extent that just aren't getting much ownership. I, from a full stack standpoint, would rather just be moving Yankees exposure to those teams.
Yeah, and then one other thing I'm going to point out is that we have there was Shannon Lambert in the YouTube chat said that the Angels bullpen is a dumpster fire. Totally agreed. It absolutely is. But with that in mind, even bad bullpens are kind of better than just average to bad starting pitchers. So the Angels bullpen this year is a 4.64 ERA and a 4.33 FIP. That's better results than I would expect from Jose Quintana over the course of the season. And also consider that as long as this game's close, the Angels are going to have some of their higher leverage bullpen pitchers going. Here are Quintana's numbers for you. He has a 6.75 ERA and a 5.08 expected ERA. That's way better. The Angels are getting way better innings out of their bullpen this year. Even if it is one of the worst bullpens in baseball, you compare those Quintana numbers to the Angels numbers. It's a worse spot for the Yankees, and they become more popular with this news.
Yeah, and I think also one thing to keep in mind is that the Angels didn't play yesterday, so their entire bullpen should be good to go. So it just makes it even more likely that they're going to be able to just, kind of mix and match their way through this game. Whereas if they had played yesterday and the bullpen had been overworked, they'd be more likely to be in a situation where, like, if the game starts to get a little out of hand, they just throw someone to the wolves and say, go give up 10 runs. We don't really care how bad you're going to pitch today. Less likely that happens given that they were off yesterday.
Yeah, and once again, just keep in mind bullpen games, and even if you say these bullpens are bad, there's just no bullpen that's going to have the numbers that Quintana has this year. He's a 6.75 ERA and a 5.08 expected ERA. Now on the other side with the Yankees, it's going to be Corey Kluber opening, and then Andrew Heaney is also going to be in this game serving as a long reliever. What are you expecting from length out of both these guys?
I'm expecting so we had Aaron Boone say that Kluber's likely to throw, I think it was 65 to 75 pitches. That sounds like about 4 innings to me, give or take. And then you're having Heaney come in after him. I think that it's just Kluber's going to go deep enough that Heaney's not in play, but he's not going to go deep enough that he's in play himself is kind of what I'm expecting.
Yeah, and this is what it kind of does to this game for me. I'm not going to be rostering Kluber. I'm not going to be rostering Andrew Heaney. From the Angels side of the game, I don't really love them as a stack either. Shohei Ohtani, as we talked about earlier, he's always going to be worthwhile as a one-off. Earlier in the day when we did the show, he was not in the player pool, which is kind of something that DraftKings and FanDuel will do when the Angels have not officially announced the starting pitcher, because there's always a situation where they go like, hey, all of a sudden Ohtani's pitching or he's hitting and they put him in the wrong position. It kind of messes up the slate a little bit. So Ohtani is a one-off, but the Angels is a stack, not all desirable for me.
Yeah, that's how I see it as well. You can always go to Ohtani. You can always go to guys like Jared Walsh, but there's just enough on their own stacks today that are, I think, in better spots than the Angels that I'll be prioritizing.
Yeah, so in this spot, kind of overall, not a spot that I think I'm going to be touching all that much. Don't like the pitchers, don't like the offenses, which doesn't happen all that often, but that is going to be one of those spots today. As for today's show, we are sponsored by JockMKT. And then if you guys want a different way to play daily fantasy sports, you don't want to worry about ownership, don't want to worry about correlations, don't want to worry about lineups, over at JockMKT, this is a totally different way to play daily fantasy sports. That it works like a stock market, but it's a jock market. It's a stock market with the players serving as stocks. And there's an IPO period. You bid on the players beforehand, and then depending on how well they play, how many fantasy points they score relative to the field, that's what equals what your payout is. But also, the slate doesn't stop just because the games have started. You could also buy, sell, trade players, all of that after the slate has started. So a lot of different ways to have fun, play on JockMKT. Josh and I did a JockMKT show during the NBA season. And that was a really good time where we were able to try to figure out which players are playing poorly that we think could pick it up as the game goes on. So all different ways to try to kind of come up with strategies, leverage the field a little bit. And if you want to go check out JockMKT, head on over, download the site, and use the promo code Awesemo to make your first deposit. Get up to a $50 bonus on that first deposit. All right, the next game we have on the slate, and this is a big one that we've talked about a lot this morning. We've talked about a little bit as the show's gone on, and that is the ownership going to the San Diego Padres. Tyler Gilbert's going to be starting against them, and Gilbert did pitch a no-hitter against them in his first major league start, which was against the Padres. That is not at all deterring the field from getting to San Diego here. This is one of the most popular offenses we've seen all season on a slate of this size. More so on DK than FanDuel, but still on FanDuel, 18.2% projected ownership. So how are you going to be handling the Padres today, Adam?
I don't think I'm going to get to much. And that's obviously scary because it is a good spot. I don't expect Tyler Gilbert to be a good pitcher going forward. I do think the Padres have a lot of good hitters in their lineup. They're reasonably priced with the exception of Tatis at 6,300. The next most expensive guy in their projected lineup on DraftKings is Manny Machado at 4,800. So they're pretty cheap. And that's also, I think, driving their ownership. Like, for example, we have San Diego right now getting 23% ownership compared to 17% for the Blue Jays, even though San Diego's got a 5.6 implied run total and Toronto's at 6.3. It's just going to be so much easier to get these San Diego bats into your lineup because of their prices. So I think because you have Toronto in a really good spot, getting less ownership, and then you have all these other teams that are just flat under-owned, I just kind of expect to not be getting to much San Diego. You know, certainly if you get some Tatis and some Machado, that's fine. But kind of the way I explained it this morning is that I just think once I narrow it down to my 150 best lineups, even though I'm more than happy to use some of these Padres hitters in lineups where I have lower owned pitching and lower owned bats, I just think that I'm not going to have that many teams that grade out as a top 150 lineup for me that feature these Padres guys, as opposed to just some of the lower owned hitters on the slate that I still think are in pretty good spots.
Yeah, and I think the other thing also that, once again, just to regurgitate the same talking points we had this morning, there is no way to come up with a lower ownership share on the San Diego Padres, at least as an offense. If you're going to play them and you're going to go crazy contrarian a pitcher, that's a different story. But just in terms of a five-man stack for the Padres here, every single player in the lineup is projected for over 15% ownership. We've got the floor is Eric Hosmer at Tommy Pham, that is, at 15.8%. Everybody else is above that. There's no way that we could save any kind of ownership by going like, hey, here's this guy who's at the bottom of the lineup that's 2,500 and is 4% owned. There just isn't that play that exists here. So as it stands now, I don't have very many Padres stacks, and I'm underweight to the field on every single individual play. In cash games, load up on the Padres for sure. For tournaments, I'm going to be rostering some other stacks that we have with somewhat comparable odds of being a top scoring team. And I just hope that the Padres don't go out and score like 12 runs.
Yeah, I think you are going to the Padres heavily in cash. Like, I think Tatis, if you can get to him, by all means. Machado looks like a top third base option. Austin Nola, if he's in the lineup, looks like a top catcher option at 3,100. Will Myers, if he's in the lineup at 3,400, looks like a top option. Even Hosmer, I mean, it's lefty-lefty, but he's 2,700 if you needed savings at first base, even though I think you probably go to Anthony Rizzo for 1,000 more. Point being, definitely don't shy away from this team in cash games. But in tournaments, I just think that I just don't think they come through often enough to justify the ownership on the slate.
Yeah, and that's really what this is about. Neither of us are going to say that the Padres are in a bad spot. Neither of us are going to say that the Padres are, I think both of us would say the Padres are one of the most likely teams to be the top scoring team on the slate. I just don't think it happens 20+% of the time. And that is where the field is at on them. So cash games, load up on them. Tournaments, I think they're fine as one-offs and some more contrarian lineups as a stack. Just beware that if you do want to make a five-man Padres stack and you're saying, oh, I'm playing Robbie Wright and I'm playing Herman Marquez or paying for Zach Wheeler in that lineup, that everybody else is doing that also. And it's just going to be really hard to win in that kind of setup. Now, on the other side of the game, Chris Paddock is going to be starting for the Padres, and we have not seen him on the mound in quite some time. Now, I was looking for some information on Chris Paddock in terms of a pitch count. I was not able to find anything, at least not before the show started. Did you have any more luck finding any news from beat reporters?
No, I haven't seen anything else.
Yeah, so, which is... It makes it tricky, right? Because we haven't seen him pitch in over a month now. His last start came July 27th against the Oakland A's. Pitched 6 innings in that start, ended up giving 3 runs. He was fine. Overall, he really struggled this year. This has been a down year for Chris Paddock. Went on the injured list, and we haven't even seen him make a minor league start. Earlier in the day, I thought we had seen him make minor league starts, but then I realized that it was just because his most recent minor league starts were from August of 2018. And the way it was set up on FanGraphs kind of made it look like their recent minor league starts. But it's really hard for me to think that Chris Paddock is going to go deep into the game. But with that said, if he does somehow manage to not be restricted and throw 5-6 innings, that would make him a good value play. So I'm definitely a little conflicted here, but is he somebody that you think you're going to be getting to at all?
I mean, maybe a little bit just because he is so cheap at 5,600 and it's not like it's a terrible matchup against Arizona, but I just have a hard time thinking he's going to go that deep into games because for one, there's been a decent history of him just, kind of getting pulled an inning earlier than we would really like from a DFS standpoint so far in his career. And then for two, like you said, no rehab start, hasn't pitched in a month. I would just be kind of surprised if he just comes back and, goes out and fires 6 innings. But 5,600, even if he goes 4 innings, there's still some path to success because basically the way I think of it is, I already said when we talked about Alexei that there are builds where using a cheap pitcher helps, and there's not many that are viable on this slate. So I certainly think even if Paddock only goes 4 innings, there's a pretty high percentage of the time he's still beating Aj Alexey because Alexey just doesn't have a good start. So I still think there's reason to use Paddock. I'm just not very confident in it, and I expect him to go something like 3 or 4 innings.
So Chris Paddock versus Aj Alexey, which one of them you're more likely to get more exposure to in tournaments?
Probably Alexey. They're right now projected for similar ownership, Paddock slightly higher, but I just think that Alexey could go deeper. Then again, though, I mean, right now we have Chris Paddock with a 9% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. We only have Alexey at like 3%. So my feelings would be Alexey, but looking at the data and knowing how much I rely on it, I guess my answer has to be Paddock.
Yeah, I'm undecided right now. In my current build, I have Alexey, but it's still something I'm really waffling on. The key thing I'm looking for is just any kind of beat reporter information on what can we expect from Chris Paddock, because I mean, we haven't seen him pitch in over a month now, and he struggled before then. So anything from 3, 4, 5 innings, none of that would surprise me. So we shall see for sure. But on the other side, with all the struggles that we have seen from Paddock when he's been on the mound this year, his numbers have been not good at all on the whole. A 5.13 ERA, a 5.13 ERA. The underlying numbers are a little bit better, but he gives up so much hard contact. That's not really that surprising that he has a 4.65 expected ERA, maybe underperforming that a little bit. But are the Arizona Diamondbacks a team that you might be looking to get to at all?
I don't think I'm going to get to much here. They're not, well, they are favorably priced. I was going to say Ketel Marte is someone that typically you want to get to if you're stacking the Padres or the Diamondbacks. He's expensive, but the middle of the order is very inexpensive. Pavin Smith, Christian Walker, David Peralta, Josh Van Meter. The issue is that they're also not very good. Dalton Varsho, I think, is a reasonable catcher pivot away from Austin Nola. But I just think, again, there's like so many teams that are projected to be under-owned and are in good spots today. We actually have a little bit of ownership going to Arizona as well. So the way things look right now, I don't anticipate getting to much of them, even though the middle of the order is really cheap.
Yeah, I would feel different if people were rostering Chris Paddock at a significant way coming back from injury, but nobody's really on Paddock. Like you said, Arizona, not massive ownership, but the field's there a little bit. So to me, I don't think this is a great leverage spot. Whereas if we were to find out that Chris Paddock is going to be 20% owned later in the day, I would feel differently. But right now, I don't see a real need to get to Arizona as a stack. Next game that we have on the slate, and it's another interesting one from a pitching standpoint. Corbin Burns is going to be on the mound for Milwaukee. Now, overall for the year, I think that other than Jacob deGrom, Corbin Burns has been the best pitcher in baseball this year. Now, with that said, this is a brutal matchup against San Francisco, whose offense has been ridiculously good. They don't strike out all that often, and Corbin Burns has showed some signs of fatigue in recent starts. He's only been over 6 strikeouts once in his last 6 starts. We've also seen his command off a little bit. He's walked 3 hitters and 2 hitters in his last 2 starts. Remember, he opened the season by not walking anybody really at all. It wasn't until the end of April that he walked, even later. It wasn't until the middle of May that he walked a hitter this year. So to see Corbin Burns now start to walk guys a little bit, I know there was a stat you referenced earlier. Less of his pitches are in the strike zone than they were earlier. So with Corbin Burns, we're still going to want to get to exposure to him in GPP. But the question I'm going to ask you, Adam, is how much?
Yeah, so in GPPs, like I'm concerned because the matchup is pretty tough. Obviously, the Giants are a really, really good offense. The game is in San Francisco, which is one of the best places to pitch. It's supposed to be like 60 degrees. So that works in Burns' favor. But really, it just comes down to the ownership projection. And right now, we have Ray around 42%. We have Wheeler at 35, and then you have Burns at about 25. I'm just perfectly happy in tournaments having the most exposure out of that trio to whoever has the lowest ownership percentage, because it kind of goes back to like we were talking about this morning with Houston and then earlier with Colorado. I can have my opinions on who I think is slightly better than the others in their particular matchup, but I'm just not going to be right that often. It's more for me about putting myself in the best position for the most people to be wrong, because that's how I'm going to maximize my payoffs. And so if Burns is the lowest owned guy, yeah, sure, I would much rather take a pitcher against the Orioles or a pitcher against the Nats. But if everyone else is going to kind of just flood to those spots and let me have the actual best pitcher on the slate in terms of talent this season at lower ownership, then I'm willing to take my chances there.
Yeah, and one thing that's changed with me from early in the day is when we were doing the show earlier, Corbin Burns was projected for more ownership than Zach Wheeler. And that was something where I just said that I'm more comfortable with Zach Wheeler in the spot he's in. So therefore I prefer him in tournaments. It's a different situation now. Zach Wheeler is now projected to be, about 50% more owned than what we have on Corbin Burns. And I'm just going to refresh this to see if anything's changed since the last time I refreshed it earlier in the show, which it is not. It's still the same case, 35% projected ownership for Wheeler to 25% for Burns. As long as that's the case, I do think Burns becomes a much more intriguing GPP play. Whereas earlier in the day, it was kind of a thing where it's like, hey, Ray, Burns, Wheeler, these guys are all about flat even in terms of ownership. And then it's just who do you think is better in this spot? And that's when I felt Wheeler. But it's different with this kind of change in ownership. So Corbin Burns, I'm going to be on a little bit heavier than I was this morning. And I don't feel great about the matchup against the San Francisco Giants. But I think that is the right way to go. On the other side of the game, Johnny Cueto is going to be pitching for San Francisco. I can't get to him as a pitcher, but what do you make of the Brewers' offense?
Kind of not that appealing to me here because of the park. I don't think Cueto is a great DFS pitcher, but I don't think he's a terrible real life pitcher either. And the park certainly helps. 20.6% strikeout percentage this year, 4.11 xFIP, only 1.16 home runs per nine. Not that that's a small number, but it's not anything that's going to make me actively seek out hitters against him. You do have some decent pricing with Colton Wong at 3,800, Adames down to 4,300, obviously Garcia at 3,800. Those guys all look pretty good, but you're getting, I think, the ownership that they deserve, if not a little bit more, going to Milwaukee. And it's just, they don't look quite as they have a similar chance of success to Boston or Tampa Bay, but they're getting, 2.5 to 4 times the ownership compared to those teams. So even though Cueto's probably not as good a pitcher as at least in terms of strikeout ability as Pavetta or Patino, I think that I'd still rather go to Tampa Bay or Boston just because they're getting less ownership.
Yeah, and that's something else we've seen kind of progress as the days gone on. I think Milwaukee was about evenly leveraged, if I remember this morning. I could be wrong on that, but now they're a little bit over leveraged on DK and FanDuel. The matchup against Johnny Cueto, it's not necessarily good. It's not bad either. It's probably somewhere in between, but there's just other offenses that I view as in kind of similar spots that are only picking up 1 or 2% ownership. So teams I'd rather get to than Milwaukee when kind of looking at similar odds of success. Now, the next game we have here on the slate, we got a couple pitchers in the final 2 games that are almost in a no man's land type of scenario. The first one here is Julio Orios at home against the Atlanta Braves. And I really like Julio Orios as a pitcher. It's just I'm finding it hard in my builds to get to him when we have guys like Zach Wheeler, Corbin Burns, and Robbie Wright on the slate. So I know you were kind of in a similar position with me this morning, but now Julio Orios, by the way, has also become slightly more popular than he was this morning. What are you doing with him in your lineups?
Yeah, same way I felt this morning. I think Julio Orios is a good pitcher. I don't think Julio Orios is as good as Zach Wheeler, Robbie Ray, and Corbin Burns, and he is at a similar price point. He also has a tough matchup against Atlanta, a team that has a lot of power, a lot of right-handed hitters in this lineup. So I don't mind Orios in the sense, for example, Zach Wheeler's getting, 3.5 times the ownership. If you wanted to just, bet me $100 and give me 3.5 to 1 odds and I get Orios, you get Wheeler, I would take that for sure. But because DFS comes down more so to, your entire lineups, I'm still going to, I think, just get a lot more builds where I go with lower owned hitters. And then I don't really care about the ownership difference too much between Wheeler or Ray or whoever and Urias. And I just end up going to those guys because they project better. Where I do think Urias serves a role is if you are stacking, Toronto, or you're stacking the Padres, or you're stacking the Yankees or something like that, a team that's getting more ownership. One way you can mitigate that is to say, okay, I'll take Urias. I know that he's less likely to succeed than Wheeler, Burns, and Ray, but he's also going to get a lot less ownership. For example, Urias right now has basically half the chance of being a top 2 pitcher as Robbie Ray, but Ray is getting 4 times the ownership. So that's a spot where you can use Urias to mitigate the ownership going to more popular stacks if you do go to them.
Yeah, and then on the other side, the Atlanta Braves, they're picking up less ownership than they should, but With that in mind, I'm not sure this is a team that I'm going to really be getting to today. It is still a tough matchup against Orioles. It's also a pretty good bullpen behind them. So sure, the Atlanta Braves are only picking up 1.5% projected ownership, but at 3% chance to be a top stack, there's other priorities for me today.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. And Urias has done a good job of limiting right-handed power this year. His strikeout percentage is about 6 or 5 points lower. 6 points lower. God, I can't do math, basic math. It's 6 points lower against right-handed hitters this year than left-handed hitters, but 128 expected ISO, 283 expected WOBA. Certainly not someone you're looking at and saying, oh, I really want to get bats against him. Jorge Soler's got a ton of power for a $3,700 hitter. Travis d'Arnaud at 3,200 gives you pretty decent upside for a catcher. Another guy you could use as a pivot away from Austin Nola, but overall, just plenty of spots where I actually want to get to on this slate, and targeting Julio Orios isn't one of them.
And the next game on the other, same game, but on the other side, Drew Smyly is going to be pitching for Atlanta. And one thing I will say is in our MLB top player props tool, which is free to use over at Awesemo.com, one of the best bets of the day is Drew Smyly for under 5.5 strikeouts. That does seem like a number that's a touch too high against the Los Angeles Dodgers, who have one of the best offense, not the best offense in baseball. Now that the team is all loaded up with all the players that they picked up at the trade deadline and that they're healthy. But the Los Angeles Dodgers also, they've become more popular as the day has gone on as well. So we now have the Dodgers 8.1% chance to be the top stack over on DK compared to a 12.7% ownership share. So the prices here are much more reasonable. They've been on recent slates, but this has come with just a crazy amount of ownership. So kind of in the same spot with a team like the Padres. I'm going to be getting to the Dodgers a little bit, but I'm not going to be anywhere near the field.
Yeah, I think the Dodgers are really similar to the Yankees for me. They're kind of similar to Toronto, although Toronto has a much, has basically 1.5 times the chances of being the top stack. But they're not so overowned that I would anticipate I just don't use them. Like, I still think I'll be using them, pairing them, with lower owned teams, lower owned pitchers. Whereas the Padres, the way things look right now, I would anticipate I just don't really get there. And that, I go to a little bit lower owned teams in Toronto and the Dodgers and the Yankees than the Padres. But, again, they, like you said, they are projected to get quite a bit of ownership. We have similar chances of success, between them, the Yankees, Houston, Colorado, and Philly. They're getting twice the ownership of Philly, 11 times or 6 times Colorado, 6 times Houston. So still not going to be a full stack that I prioritize as much as, mixing in some of these bats that are in a good spot against Smyly into my lineups where I have lower owned hitters elsewhere.
All right, now we get to one of our favorite spots of the day. If not our favorite spot, it is my favorite spot. In the build I have right now, the team that I have the most exposure to is the Houston Astros. The spot against Chris Flexen on the road is not the best in the world, but as the day's gone on, we just haven't seen enough ownership go to Houston. They've come up marginally earlier in the day. They're like 1.6% projected ownership as a stat. They're currently at 2.2%. It's not to say that Chris Flexen's bad, but he's just kind of okay. And the Houston Astros have one of the best offenses in baseball, and nobody's rostering them today. That in itself is enough reason for me to get to Houston as a contrarian option. I understand they haven't come through a lot for us recently, and it's been a stack I've been on, but I don't really care. The numbers still make sense. There's not a single player in this lineup projected for more than 2% ownership today. I'm going to be overweight to every single hitter in this lineup.
Yeah, I'm just willing to bet on the talent here. Like, I don't think Chris Flexen is bad. He's done a pretty good job of limiting power, limiting hard contact this year. 0.9 home runs per 9 innings, 4.47 xFIP. The park isn't great for hitting, especially when it's supposed to be like 60 degrees tonight. So it's not like it would be surprising at all if Houston doesn't have a good game here. It's not like, Toronto, where if they don't put up runs on Chris Ellis in the Orioles bullpen, I will legitimately be surprised. It's not like it would be surprising if Houston just kind of has a mediocre performance, but there's so much talent in this lineup at such little ownership that I just firmly believe if outside of, the facing the best pitchers, if Houston, pretty much any slate where Houston's 1 to 2% owned, when their lineup is healthy, they have Bregman back, they have Kyle Tucker back, in addition to everyone that they've had all season long. You can just kind of always play them. And I think over the course of a season, you'll make money because of how good they are. So Flexen's certainly not a good enough pitcher that I'm going to shy away from the Astros a low ownership.
No, and once again, there are worse pitchers on the slate than Chris Flexen. There aren't really better offenses on the slate than the Houston Astros. You could say, maybe the Yankees are better, maybe the Dodgers are better, but at worst, the Astros are a top 5 offense in baseball. And Chris Flexen this year, he does have a 3.54 ERA, but he's a 4.08 expected ERA. He doesn't generate swing and misses. He puts the ball in play a lot, and that could be an issue against an offense with as much power as the Houston Astros have. Given this kind of ownership they have, as long as they remain this unpopular, I want to get some overweight to the field. And that's something that I feel pretty good about. They are my most rostered stack today for people in chat that are asking. And my second most right now is Boston and Tampa Bay. But I'm not totally sold on that. But Houston, I'm pretty sure, will be my most rostered offense. Now, on the mound for Houston, let's talk about Luis Garcia, who's in a very, very type of similar situation to Julio Orios. Luis Garcia, talented enough pitcher, positive matchup against Seattle. He's also playing in a pitcher-friendly park. But we have other options to consider, like Robbie Wright, Corbin Burns, and Zach Wheeler. That kind of makes it hard for me to prioritize Luis Garcia.
Yeah, I kind of think you could just replay everything I said about Julio Orios and apply it to Luis Garcia. They are very similarly priced, very similarly owned, very similar chances of success. And, again, I think Garcia is a good pitcher. I don't think he's on the same level as the three main guys. He hasn't thrown 100 pitches in at least 10 straight starts. I didn't go back further than that, but definitely hasn't gotten there then, over that time. We've seen a pretty short hook on him, which hurts when you need him to outscore guys like Ray, Burns, and Wheeler. So, if I have, the Dodgers or the Yankees or the Blue Jays or the Padres or whatever, then Garcia becomes more appealing just because of the ownership discount. But I'm still just having trouble prioritizing him when I don't have to pay that much more money to get to pitchers that are just better.
So I guess one other question I'll ask you then is, in between Julio Orios and Luis Garcia, if somebody's playing a single entry lineup and they're really committed to stacking the Padres and they want to get different at pitcher, would you say they should go with Julio Orios or Luis Garcia as a better contrarian pitching option? I
think they're close to identical. I mean, we have Garcia right now with a 16% chance of being a top two pitcher. We have Urias at 15.9, 10.8% projected ownership coming into Garcia, 10.4 to Urias. I guess I would really just say whoever's we just actually got an update. So now we have Urias at 10%, Garcia at 8.9, still, basically the same. I really just think that I would say whoever's projected to be lowest owned at lock, use them. Or, obviously if the $300 makes a difference, then just use Garcia.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that right now we do have Garcia's a little cheaper, a little bit less ownership. Still, we're splitting hairs here. It's 10 versus 8.9% projected ownership. But still, I think the $300, that's probably enough for me to say Luis Garcia is going to be the better option for me more often than not in those spots. But either way, we're really just splitting hairs here. Luis Garcia, Julio Orios, very similar type pitchers and ones that I don't really see myself getting to all that often, especially considering that I'm not going to be playing the Padres that much. But on the other side, stacking Seattle, is that something you're going to be doing at all?
I don't think so. I mean, I have a lot of respect for Garcia as a pitcher. He's not really pulling enough ownership for it to drive Seattle stacks up for me in that way. Never going to talk anyone off of playing a relatively cheap Mitch Haniger or Kyle Seager. Both guys are good. Both guys have plenty of power and, can have success against pretty much anyone. But just nothing standing out for me from Seattle. 3.8 implied run total, bad hitting weather, as I mentioned when we talked about the Astros stack. So nothing really standing out from the Mariners.
All right, that is going to do it for us today, guys, but don't go anywhere. MLB Live Before Lock is coming up next. Don't forget to check out JockMarket and use the promo code Awesemo when you make your first deposit.
can't see the kid, right?
I was gonna say.
Good evening and welcome in. We are live before lock. That's right. We have 58, just over, actually, an hour, 7:05. I'm always cheating those extra 5 minutes because I know Eric Lindquist can't wait to get the hell out of here at the top of the hour. He's got
easy.
Right? Well, you've got more important stuff to do. Look, by the time we're done tonight, Jordan who's producing the show. Make sure you say hi in the chat to him. Is going to come down with like a bunch of memes. He's going to beat you to shit by the time we're done here. You and I are going to do so many impersonations that your voice is going to be shot. I didn't mean to imply, Eric, that you don't want to hang out with me or the chat. That's not the case. It's just I think this is a grueling hour for you each and every week.
All right. No. So first of all, is this the first show ever that you've just brought your baby live on Live Before Lock?
Not the first one, but you know what? I didn't realize that he's in shot. Normally,
he's in shot.
I try to keep it, Yes, Mike Campbell, Shander, and the Chalk Donkey. I like that. That
can we get a Lion King moment here?
I don't want to. People have come here to hear and see you, Eric. As far as baseball expertise, do they really want to see my kid?
Yes, they do. It's an hour before lock. We have lineups. We're fine. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Look at this poor.
Look at that little guy.
Nobody wants to see this kid. He is so miserable with me because I have now somebody I can tease and mess with.
It's nice because now there's two babies on this show. This is great.
Was that a shot at Jordan?
That was a shot at myself. Fine. It was.
Here I am thinking already subtle shots at Jordan. Be careful. He's got a meme.
Yeah, how do I get my face to go? His face is like jaws so relaxed. It's like he's milk wasted. Absolutely.
Yes.
But anyway, you have an adorable child. There's really no way around that. It's
not me. It's my wife, brother. Trust me.
Yeah, I know that too, but whatever. It's fine.
That's the one thing that nobody tonight will argue. You could say, hey, don't start Bryce Harper. You could get all around. The one thing nobody will argue is that any beauty from my son is coming from my wife. Clearly not this ugly mug. What's happening, Eric?
What's going on, my dude? So I apologize to everybody. Let's just get this out of the way here. I'm not feeling 100%, and I'm not going to eat chalk while I'm not feeling 100%. Tomorrow is going to be the day that I eat chalk. I will eat some chalk tomorrow. I apologize to you, Eytan. I know you were looking forward to this a lot. I think you completely forgot about it until I just brought it up now. It's because you're in the middle of a 24-hour news cycle that is your child waking up and screaming and yelling and doing all the things and apparently destroying everything in your house.
Yeah. Yes, and it's not because of his hands. It's bodily fluid that is destroying everything in my house. Absolutely. Yeah. Now, look, if that's not worth we've got a couple of things here, right? Thumbs up for Eric Lindquist playing hurt. Thumbs up for you. You finally got to see the kid. All right. So don't worry about that. We're doing stuff above and beyond. You think Greg Ehrenberg's going to hold his baby up when that time comes?
Come on now. Hey, if it's your stomach chalk, will make you feel better. That's what I was told randomly because apparently Tums is like a neighbor of some type of chalk or something. But I will 100% do it. I'm a man of my word. Tuesday, I will do it on a day when I'm not feeling as like I went to the gym this morning, just like wanted to die. So there was that. Maybe weekend activities I should limit a little bit more, that's for sure. But
when did you get out? Yes, Quinn those blowouts. When did you get out? You got out Saturday, didn't you?
Yeah, Saturday. I went out Friday in the world. I went out in the world on Saturday. No, Saturday.
Yeah, but you were home. You weren't back in Vegas.
No, I was home. No, God, that was weeks ago. I was in Denver beforehand. So it's weird. I had my best friend's bachelor party and both times hitting up the line finals with Ryan. Otherwise, I just stay home and watch sports because it's awfully fun to do. Pretty much the easiest thing ever. Everybody says no need for chalk. I will literally eat chalk. Don't you worry about it. Also will not be eating chalk in MLB DFS tonight. So don't you worry about that. But again, I get to do an entire show with Baby Junior. You still have him there, don't you? No.
Yeah. He's in my hands. I didn't want him to be a distraction.
I want to have the good vibes. I want the good vibes this entire time. See, I want to be able to see him. It makes me nervous when I can't.
Is that right? Okay. Yeah. Well, last thing we want on this show is you to be nervous.
Yeah. Well,
so let's dive into it, my friend.
That's true.
Now,
let's do it.
As far as real quick, what time will you be eating the chalk? This was a big topic of conversation last week, and I want to make sure people know what time, because I'm not on with you
right
tomorrow.
off the bat. I'll be on with Josh tomorrow. I think
What
it's
time?
Josh Engelman and myself at so 3:00 my time, 6:00.
Does
6 o'clock
Engelman
out
have
there.
any idea what's going on here, that you're just going to completely derail the show and need a piece of chalk?
Oh yeah, no. So I said if we got over 400 likes or 350 likes, whatever it was, and everybody, I'm a man of my word. The
Yes,
people
you
came
are.
through. The people came through. Absolutely going to go for it. Oh, he's awake. Look at his little face. He's so happy. Oh,
Okay. I don't want this to be. Now I'm going to get an email from Nolan. Can you find a babysitter, for goodness sakes? Look, Jordan's already put the email in. He's dined me out to management. Like, come on, I can't have this guy bring the baby on here. And don't worry, I have the pinky.
I think it's good. Yeah, thumbs up for the little one. Thumbs up for the little one. That's what it is.
All right, let's look at this, my friend. We'll tell you all about Jock Market tonight. Of course, we need to continue to remind you about betting you. And I did a show earlier with Ben Rasa, and he can't stop talking about the clean sheet that he had over the weekend with the return of college football. So Matt Gajeski, all over it every Wednesday. That's this week, 2 days. You'll get another edition of Betting You. Make sure you download it wherever you get your podcast, Spotify and Apple Podcasts. All right, we have a couple of props we're going to get to as well before we get out of here. Some home runs and everything available for you on Awesemo, $29.95 a week, Awesemo Plus. But you don't need to wait for the free tools like player rankings tonight. You can just take advantage of everything and use that, projections, pardon me. You can use that alongside everything Eric is about to lay out for you, my friend. All right, so let's look at the slate, and then we'll start to get into some pitchers here. But overall, we've got 9 games on this, so it's not gigantic, but it's not short by any means. Where's the approach coming into tonight?
All right, so stacks are kind of where it's at tonight, because I think the pitching is pretty clear cut, more so than it's been in a long time. I think it's pretty easy to play 25% plus of Robbie Ray, Zach Wheeler, Corbin Burns, Herman Marquez. Move on with your life. I'm going to probably get to the most out of Corbin Burns. He's come in the lowest owned out of those 4 here. I guess we just got to refresh in ownership. 26.8%. Him and Marquez are pretty negligible. Give me the arm talent of Burns. Yes, we have some concerns about walks. Yes, we have some other things that are starting to pop up for him. But still, in the context of an entire season, if we're talking about a 1-game sample, I'm going to go out and play the guy who has a 34.4% K percentage, a 30.4% hard hit percentage. Of course, San Francisco, I bring this up once every single show, and I think I probably did as well yesterday. I know that I did. San Francisco, 199 ISO against right-handed pitching on the season. That is best in baseball. It's a freaky spot, but Corbin Burns is just different. I think I want to be siding with him just a little bit more than every other pitcher down here in this range. And then you're looking at the mid-range, and it's pretty easy to scattershot some of these guys. Aj Alexey, I've seen his name a lot more places. I'm trying to find out whether or not that's something that I might be wanting to toy with. 4,700 you don't really need on this slate, but elsewhere, like Luis Patino, I think getting to a little bit of him, I absolutely love him and his long-term prospects. Obviously, it's a horrible spot, but it's a great ballpark. Julio Orios going up against Atlanta, getting a lot of those lefties and neutralizing them. Freddie Freeman hits everybody, but it neutralizes, they're probably going to play Heredia over Jock Peterson and such. I think he's probably somebody I want to get to a little bit more than the field. It really is going to come down for me on this slate. I mean, I'm playing 300 something lineups over on DK. I'm playing quite a bit over there today. I really like this slate. It really comes down to stacks.
All right, so before we do that, now we're going to have to get a little deeper into your mind here. I know that's dangerous when it comes to pitching specifically. You mentioned Burns, and not even the second, actually the third, and it's by a small margin over Marquez, highest owned that we have. Now you look at where he is projected to the field as well as ownership. There's a small amount of leverage, but the point being is that Robbie Ray, Zach Wheeler, even Marquez, you're losing a lot of leverage based on where we have them projected to where the ownership is. So clearly Burns stands out from that regard. Pardon me. I do wonder, though, if you were to take Burns off the slate tonight and you were to just to approach it elsewhere, where are you looking at? Is it more, and I hate to use this term, and again, a reminder to hit that notification bell so you're not straggling in like Ryan Stubbs asking, did I miss the chalk? Did I miss the chalk? You didn't miss the chalk. We'll explain that coming up in a couple of minutes. But the point being here, in my question, Eric, is looking at everyone else, if it's going more Robbie Ray, Zach Wheeler, because even with Ray, you're just under 50% of the field, and that's workable with your second pitcher. Or do you start to get creative? Do you start to make an argument for Luis Garcia? Do you start to make an argument for somebody even lesser owned that has a decent chance of being a Patino, for example? Do you start to make that lesser owned argument if I were to just take Corbin Burns off the slate tonight?
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is that you have Wheeler, who he's no slouch himself, as a Phillies fan. The guy's outrageous. I think he's the best pitcher between him and Nola on this Phillies staff. I'm definitely going to side more with Zach Wheeler. 29.1% K percentage, limits walks, 30% hard hit percentage, keeps it down, 8.2 degree launch angle, does everything you kind of want out of a major league pitcher. Going up against Washington, you basically are fading two hitters. And these two hitters have been doing a lot of impact here the last couple slates, it feels like. Josh Bell, Juan Soto, constantly there. We do have some weather to watch out for. We got Loco there in the chat. I think this is kind of our only possible weather spot that we have on the day. So it matters a lot because Zach Wheeler is a guy that I'm definitely going to get to about 30% here. I'm just a little bit underneath the field. And part of that is trying to spread out my exposures over a number of lineups to some of these other guys. If it doesn't become those top end dudes, though, if it's not Ray, Wheeler, Burns, Marquez, for me, I'm trying to play some Aj Alexey. And I know that this is kind of a weird take. And I will say the top two pitcher tool, it doesn't feel very good to say that, oh, this is a guy that kind of sticks out, but the K percentage is definitely there for him. I just don't know how many pitches he's going to go. He's all the way down there at the complete floor, around 4,700 over on DK. No chance whatsoever on FanDuel. But if I'm trying to get different in a large field GPP, Chris Paddock I have more, I think, pitch concerns for him than I do Aj Alexey. And Aj Alexey is a pretty good pitcher, it looks like, going up against a Colorado matchup. And I'm going to have more Colorado stacks. I'm going to have more Aj Alexey, I think, than the field, just to try to mix and match. Maybe only one of those pitchers really goes off, allows me to get to some of the top tier stacks a little bit easier, get to more Toronto. And Toronto, I'm definitely going to be getting to, considering, they're the most flat leverage team here. Anything that isn't San Diego is going to be a pretty good way to go, I think, on this slate. But for the most part, I'm going to be paying attention to Loco here, get his words as we're paying attention, because Zach Wheeler, a tough guy to get away from.
Yeah, and you mentioned two guys in Paddock, or actually you mentioned Paddock, but the other guy would be Kluber as well, where coming off of injury. And I wonder how much that weights at all. And everything is circumstantial, right? If it's an oblique that has put a guy out and missed a start or two, whatever the case may be, each individual injury is different. But on a bigger slate, if you don't have to roster somebody who is dealing with fresh off of an injury, maybe that's a nice little deterrent. And look, you're not spending a ton on either one of these guys. Kluber, the higher end offer at 7,400. Paddock is much more of a cheaper option, if that. But as crazy as it is, Paddock is at 9.6% here to be a top two pitcher, which is tied for Gray as the highest guys in single digits. But my concern would always be somebody coming off of an injury, right?
Yes. Yeah, and I think that might be something. And again, I'm not one to speak on. I know the way that the data works for the most part. We've got Eddie Lai, we've got Steve Buzzer, we've got Alex Baker. We have some incredible DFS players that are behind the scenes putting work every day to be able to get these tools firing. And I just got to understand that would be a Chris Paddock in a vacuum. Chris Paddock, more neutral, not saying that he stretched out, not saying that it's like him on a 40, 50 pitch count. I think it's probably saying, oh, he's going to throw 75, 80 here in this spot at least. He's 5,600. There's some reasons to get to a little bit there, but I mean, there's going to be a tiny bit of ownership, 6.4% there. Going up against Arizona, of course, this is a team that's just complete garbage and horrible. So I'm not completely ecstatic going their direction, but I got to think on this slate today that it's not it's not a necessity. If you're playing, the mini max, if you're playing the $5, then 70,000 plus entries, you can get to a little bit of Paddock, but I would rather go to Aj Alexey between the two personally.
So I'm curious, and for all intents and purposes here, let me just be honest for transparency. I have 2 units on the Phil's money line. So I think this is I really think this is a big game for the Philadelphia Phillies. I'm not saying anything futures wise, anything like that, but just because they win the game, as you and countless of people on here, analysts on here have made this point from a real life to DFS standpoint, doesn't mean that Josiah Gray is going to get knocked out in the third inning. The Phillies can strike out. I just wonder, for a guy in Gray who's a little bit on the pricey end as far as what you can expect back at 8,800, which I imagine is probably more of a deterrent than not, how workable is Gray on a lineup that could knock him out in the third or fourth inning, but also could surrender 6 or 7 Ks to Gray on a good night.
That's the beauty of baseball, is that you can play more than one lineup and you can play both spots in this. I have no problem getting to both of it. And I think that that's probably the appropriate way to do it. I mean, I'm kind of surprised that Josiah Gray, who has been somebody that people have clicked on quite a bit, he's the one with 1.2% ownership. I mean, I'm definitely going to be over top of that. You have a really good gauge for the way that baseball ownership, you've picked up on this very, very quickly. Somebody in chat was saying that, they see you at the top of the FanDuel quarter, the FanDuel tournaments. So they want to get your takes on this. So, I mean, Josiah Gray, is he in play for you on FanDuel today?
All right, to be fair,
ask you.
All I've learned and applied is from you and Adam, because you're the two people who at least will get back to me. Like, I don't have the stone to hit up Alex Baker and be like, hey, man, could you help me out on this small 25?
I maxed out the mini max. Can you help me?
Exactly right. So I'm just taking what you and Adam have sat through both on and off air with me. But no, I think that this is a good it's a great opportunity to fade the field. And it's not that Zach Wheeler can't have a great game, but if I'm looking at Gray and knowing that there is a really high propensity for this Phillies team, at least for the first 5, right? Like, I would love the under. I'd even go under 3.5 and know that I'm going to get a great return on the first 5. I think Gray stands his best chance the first 5 innings, the first 2 times through this order, to take advantage of how aggressive they are. And also the Phillies are in a back to the wall scenario. And I've seen them tight before, and I've seen them not really able to connect with the baseball consistently. So, yeah, you have fool's gold when you knock off Arizona. Washington is not great either, but it's a divisional opponent. I just feel like tonight would be a night where I would be way over that 1.5% for Gray on the field.
Okay, I don't know about way over if you're making 150.
6%. Right?
Okay. Yeah. That's great. The 6% is 3x. I mean, or 4x. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And again, when I think way over, I'm thinking I'm going to blast something out of the water a little bit. I guess it's the DFS terminology that everybody plays with. Oh, I'm going to fade this guy, but then you have 5% of him. And it's a tough thing to you always just kind of want to say like, hey, I'm going to have this much. I would have like 10% of Josiah Gray if you wanted to in that spot. I think that that's more than applicable. You don't need to go nuts with the guy too. The number of times he goes off, as long as you're somewhat with your core and you're probably going to a more popular stack in a lot of those lineups. You're not playing him with the Giants or something. You're definitely going to probably not need that much in 150 lineups in a small field tournament or in a large field tournament, small buy-in to get that much different and be all right with it. For me, the guy that I'm trying to understand what to do, Luis Patino, is very hard because this Red Sox team is absolutely ridiculous. Luis Patino, though, is one of the guys that I had kind of like stuck my heels in the ground and said, this guy is going to be it going forward. Obviously, we've seen Blake Snell have something here a little bit of late where the trade looks a little bit more evened, but Luis Patino, 23.9% K percentage isn't that good. He has a fly ball problem, but this ballpark is great. The lineup isn't nearly as imposing on the back end. There are definitely still some Ks that exist. I mean, Duran, 34.3% here on the season. So, I mean, that's a larger number. You get Munoz in there as well. What is his number for the season? Munoz is at 40% K percentage, very limited, 3 batted balls in play. So yeah, it's not anything negligible there. So there's at least some Ks. Bobby Dahlbeck always strikes out. He also hits the ball very, very hard and far. So that entire back end, there's more Ks that are there, but he could definitely also get murdered 1 through 5 here. And you'd kind of be held like you're left holding the bag. I'm going to get to about 10%, 12% of him and just kind of cap it. I don't know what else to do here with him because I want to play him. I want to go way over the field on him. He would be my guy, but I just can't against the Red Sox.
Yeah. And speaking of the Red Sox, they clearly need this game 10 times more than Tampa Bay does, where if the Red Sox lose tonight, there's a lot of ramifications involved. But, and there's always the but here, right? Because when you talk about 8 or 9 guys in the AL, up, you have a lot more working for you as far as the variance is concerned. When it's just one arm out there, Nick Pavetta can come out and be like, all right, man, this is it. Like, this must-win game. I got it, man. I got it. And the ball gets knocked, the Tampa knocks the cover off the ball. I'm looking at Pavetta, and again, I'm going to roster him. I'm not saying I'm hard fading him, but I don't think I'm getting to where the field is. And it's a little surprising that he's that high owned, knowing that we don't really have him projected as high as like a Gray, Paddock mentioned, even, the bigger guns in the double digits one. He's cheap. And I understand that he's cheap compared to some other guys out here, but it feels like it's more of a tight scenario. And I don't know if I can just put all of this pressure on Nick Pavetta tonight, where if he does, and he has a really great game, you don't really have that much advantage. Like, look, I get it. 12.2% of the field is still a hell of a lot that you're having in your favor, but it's not a 3.2 Kluber. It's not a 6.4 Paddock. There's still double digits, and I imagine it's going to go up even more as we get to lock. So how do you approach a guy, Nick Pavetta, who's definitely manageable from the price, has shown flashes that he can pitch well, but maybe this is too tight of a scenario for the entire team, including Pavetta?
Yeah, but you get Zunino, 36.8%, Brandon Lau, 28.3%, Kevin Kiermaier, 26.3%, Joey Wendell, 22.2%. There's a lot of strikeouts that still are in this Tampa Bay lineup. And one of the great equalizers, and something that I don't think is necessarily factored in enough when you talk about incurring risk, is just the ability to generate strikeouts and elevate your floor. So the ability that he has at least to just have over a 26% strikeout percentage. Yeah, Tampa Bay could definitely go out there and murder him, or you could end up just giving up 6 Ks and you're not looking at a GPP winner by any means. But in the event that in this ballpark, which, 4.6 is one of the lower totals you've seen for the race, and you saw him north of 6.5, 7 in Baltimore, and different pitching staffs, different situation. But this ballpark does neutralize a lot of those problems. It definitely, Tampa Bay has been a team a lot of people have been playing lately, and rightfully so. I think you should be playing them even in this spot against Pavetta on the other side. But Nick Pavetta at least has the K percentage to be viable, I think, in this spot, 26.1%. And there are Ks available specifically, if you're not looking at Yandy Diaz, Wander Franco, Manuel Margot, there are guys that you can definitely see him racking up strikeouts with. So I like Nick Pavetta. I think his ownership is about appropriate. I'm not going to make some kind of a big stand and say that I want to get to a ton more of him in this spot. 12.2%. I think that that's about the right number on DK. I'm happy to get to that.
I see you going back with our buddy Butthole.
Yeah, well, no, some guy said I was the worst Awesemo hire or something. And I was like, gee, that's so nice of you. Enjoy your 9 to 5 in your little cubicle.
Oh, you went full LeBron on him.
I did.
You have to go back to your life when this is all over at 7:05 Eastern. You have to go back to your cubicle.
People think that I care. I just only care about the people that want to try to win money. I'm going to be as helpful as I possibly can. And plus, I've had enough crap come at me. I don't get affected anymore. It's very strange. And I want people to like me. Of course, I want people to like the content. And I'm going to work my ass off and be as hard of a working dude as I possibly can. And if you have questions, you can always hit me up in premium Slack. But saying, oh, I don't think he was a great Awesemo hire. Well, I don't think you're very nice, and I'll ban you next time. Have a great day, you a-hole.
Look at that. Now you're getting a lot of support here, and
I feel loved. I feel loved.
You should feel loved.
Yeah, no,
now, these
you guys
are all
great
Jordan
people.
Burners. Jordan has like 6 burners just in case.
They're just testing me. See,
no.
See if I go off the rails one day, what happens? It's like, yeah. How we doing today, everybody?
Look, you think anybody else on?
I am Butthole Jenkins. Something like that.
How do you think Butthole sounds?
That's a great question. We should honestly, Butthole, what needs to happen? One, I don't know your DK or FanDuel username, but if something, leave Tink alone. That's very nice of you guys. Yes, I'm Tinkerquist. What do you want from me? Can't get much more manly than that. But if you want Butthole Jenkins, if you end up banking a GPP in NFL, I'll get you on a show. I'll find a way to get you on a show.
Why don't we do this? Like, I think Butthole, if we got him to record, cut the crap, who's the best fill in the blank on the slate? Like, we could do that every live before lock. But
what if he has like an incredible radio voice? We're super screwed because he's obviously entertaining. We obviously are talking about him. He keeps it interesting. Right. Yeah, him. Hey, we should also say Butthole Jenkins / Tink Arquist. They're the same person. So we just gotta throw that out there. There's no way these two douchers aren't the same dude. So much love. Can't wait to meet you. Big that GPP.
Oh my goodness. See, Manny C. Even if you are the worst hire and you aren't, you're the most entertaining. My chalk eating one eyebrowed friend.
Oh my God.
What is that?
Chat is outrageous today. 964 people.
You bring them
Hit that
out,
like
man.
button. That'd be lovely.
You bring them out. Yes, please. We're not even at 200 likes right now. Now, there's no crazy return on liking except just the satisfaction of knowing that you've helped us out. Subscribe to this channel. Awesemo odds the Awesemo Fantasy Football channel. You never know where Eric is going to pop up. So you want to make sure you're subscribed and hit the notification bell. Could be anywhere, anytime. Could be a different voice. You could be doing a completely different voice. Could you do the show in Christopher Walken's voice?
I can't really do him very well. I don't know how it even works. For me, the Christian Bale is like the easy default. I had like a really hoarse voice that day, and it was like, "No longer not say yourself a villain." It's like, I don't know. You could
that's
do that
him doing Batman though. Like he doesn't.
I know
walk
it's
around the house talking like that.
Yeah, he's a good actor. I don't want to give him too much shit. Him and The Fighter was awesome.
I didn't see that. I thought you could do a good walk, like from King of New York, right? Nothing goes down unless I'm involved. No dope deals, no blackjack, no nothing. Right?
It's so good.
You guys got fat while everybody starved on the street.
Oh my God! Look at you. Okay, I always just think of his monologue about putting the watch and
that's the ease. That's the go-to one. But I like a little deep cut in my impersonation. All right. Now, before we hit the stacks and the bats, we'll tell you all about Jock Market as well coming up here. But speaking of the Awesemo Fantasy Football channel, we have this amazing draft kit for you. Season-long best ball fantasy leagues. Projections, tools, analysis that we all use for NFL DFS goes into this package, including our draft wingman. I saw Josh yesterday morning running a draft on ESPN with a wingman. This thing is insane. Yeah. It's like a live aid for you the entire time, where it constantly is telling you where to draft and who to draft, best ball ranking, stacking guide, everything. Less than $10 for everything. You'll get this package for 33% off. Use our promo code WR, like wide receiver, WR at checkout. All right, man, you said earlier that everything is about the bats tonight. We exhausted the pitchers just to try and see if there was anything, a mine or two that we can uncover here. But the reality is that this is all about the bats, and it's all about, as we always try and get some leverage here. So where do you begin with your favorite stack, or at least the one, may not be your favorite, but the one that you even have to hold your nose and hold your breath to roster the most, because that's going to win you the most money?
Okay, so I think the guys on the tail end of our last show, I caught the last 10 minutes, and they talked about Houston, and I think just Houston sticks out huge on the top stacks tool. 5.8 for them. Same thing with Colorado, but I definitely just trust the Houston side of it a little bit more. Plus, just I'm going through his fan graphs, and Aj Alexey, not a guy that I'm going crazy to pick on. Only 1.23 home runs per 9 at the AAA this entire season here. Had a 4.38 FIP, 4.35 xFIP. Not somebody that's like this elite pitcher by any means, but 11.66 Ks per 9. He's going to get some swings and misses. So I'm not sure how stretched out he's going to be in this spot or how many innings he's going to go, but Colorado on the other side, definitely not as intriguing as getting to Houston, who in any matchup, in any spot, one of my favorite things to do is when Houston is unowned, you just play a bunch of Houston. They have power. They have speed. They have guys who can get on base. You run that line a couple times. It is so easy to imagine that they break this slate and they're coming in completely unowned. And that's shocking to me in a divisional game that really matters. I just love getting to Houston here in this spot. 4.8 implied run total as well. We're seeing guys, San Diego has a 5.5. We're literally talking about the difference of 0.7 runs, but we're talking about the chasm of ownership between the two here. And so for San Diego, I've literally just capped those guys, everybody in half of what their current ownership is. So I'm not going to write off a team like San Diego. There aren't enough like fantastic offensive spots to get away from it, but I'm prioritizing more Toronto. I'm prioritizing more Dodgers and trying to get different and be smart about how I put those stacks together, because both of them are getting negative leverage. But you can play as much Houston as you want, and you're not going to be wrong on this slate.
Yeah, the ownership share clearly compared to where we have it. You mentioned that there's 5+ points of leverage for Houston and Colorado. That's kind of right there on the refresh. So what's the difference between the two when you look at the leverage, when you look at both pretty much identical for ownership share? They're both right there as far as not the top stack by any means, but Houston, Colorado, only 4 teams ahead of them, with San Diego, Toronto kind of running away. So the split between Houston and Colorado, it doesn't even look like the price for that matter, where normally Houston can be a little cheaper, doesn't even look like that's going to be a factor.
Yeah, it's not. And Houston, though, is just a significantly better offense. Also, the pricing is crazy for Colorado today over on DraftKings. I mean, there's some expensive bats, which I actually personally like, because then you get this spot where you can get some leverage on them. You can play them. You can find your way to like, if they were cheaper in this spot, you would see a lot of ownership going their direction. It would be another negative team of leverage to get to on this slate. But Houston, Colorado, I have no problems getting either, but I just prefer the Houston side from a talent perspective so much more. Chris Flexen, not a very good pitcher with his Mets, with the Seattle Mariners now. Just not somebody that I'm going to be getting to whatsoever. And I just think it's such an easy spot to plug and play as many of these dudes as possible. I will say it's kind of strange because maybe he's just the one guy that I feel like from the Houston side, I don't play as much. And he was at least earlier in the season leading the AL in batting average, but Michael Brantley just hits for no power whatsoever. 3,800 that he's at right now. Let me see what he's got. He's only got 8 home runs on the season. He's batting 317. He just isn't a guy that's going to go out and get a bunch of homers. And I know I'm talking him into going yard, but one of the things that I do like to do with Houston is kind of remove him out of the grouping. He tends to get a little bit more ownership because he is batting second. Just not a lot of power there. I would much rather, my favorite thing is to play Kyle Tucker and prioritize him a lot more. 22 home runs here on the season, 278 batting average. I just think you're getting a little bit more pop at lower ownership in your stack as well. So Michael Brantley, sure. Somebody you can definitely get on base, kind of do what you need to do in that stack. But I prefer to not play him very much. I would much rather go to just about everybody else in that lineup.
Colin Boer said, just made a Houston stack with no Brantley. Jake Myers at 2,500.
Colin's been around the block. He knows things.
Yeah.
Colin, he checks out the shows. I always see the name. He always drops in, says nice things. So Colin, you, sir, are sharp.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'd like to acknowledge one or two people saying something positive as opposed to just the regular, which is you suck, Lindquist, and this other shit that we get. So I figured there'd be some
it's like 1%, but it was like the 1% while you were talking and timed, and it like showed up and had to be acknowledged because it was just like, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Now, Robert Pena asked the question. We talked about this briefly in the beginning, and again, a reminder to hit that notification bell. The likes as well. We've got nearly 1,000 people watching, only 224 thumbs up. Inexcusable. Eric can't begin his night on a positive note unless we have at least 350. Now, you're going to send Lindquist into a bad spin tonight. He's going to have a bad night. He's going to have a bad mood. He's going to be yelling at the dog, all this other stuff. Like, you don't want that. Come on, 350 is a definitely attainable number for us, and he doesn't even need to eat any chalk or anything like that. Now, it looks like the weather in Washington won't be a factor until later on, most likely after the game. Are you seeing that as well?
I was trying to find something quick about it, mainly because I'm just kind of like finalizing some of my pitching stuff. I already have my dummies in, so regardless, I'm not going to be screwed like I normally would be on this show and have a meltdown, which I guess people do like to see. There's that. But I do think I'm going to just go full forward with that game. I have no problem with it. It's the only spot on this entire slate, and it doesn't look that bad.
No, and that's exactly the issue where it's just one small spot. So San Diego, I want to get to the Yankees, but really quick, before we touch on that, there's no leverage. You're giving up a ton of leverage with San Diego. But then again, if they break the slate tonight, if they're the top stack tonight, just narrowly above Toronto and the Yankees, it's just a quarter of the field. And you can definitely have a couple of difference makers as far as who your pitchers are, especially that P2, as you've given a couple of different options. So is the ownership / leverage a concern, or is it more what you laid out earlier, where it's just the actual specifics of San Diego tonight that are going to deter you?
It's baseball. This is baseball. And in the long run, what you're trying to do,
Susan, by the way, that's baseball, Susan.
Yeah, it's a little bit of that. There's no crying in baseball unless you're me and I'm in the truck tomorrow. And
did you just gloss over that John Sterling reference?
I did not give it the appropriate time that it needed to, because I was keeping my train of thought.
Go ahead. I don't want to derail.
You're holding a baby. You're busy. That's so cute. He's just chilling. I thought you were breastfeeding him for a second.
He's trying. Trust me.
Okay. He's confused. He's unsure.
Well,
but go ahead.
Your turn.
Okay. I'm sorry. I am who I am.
If I
wasn't, then why would I say I am? In the music, okay, we're gonna keep going. I love getting off of San Diego, though. I mean, we just got to cut the ownership in half on them. That is going to be one of the big stands that I have. Get to Tatis. Tatis is fine. You can play Tatis. You can play a Hosmer if you need salary savings. Like, there's no issue with it. But in the long run, I mean, only a 5.54 implied run total. And this guy, yes, he gave up a no-hitter to San Diego earlier this season. I have a very strong hunch that isn't going to be happening here again. Nobody's getting away from this spot. I'm going to get away from it. Manny Machado being a little bit lighter there. I mean, both of those guys, if you want to play them as two-mans and kind of involve them in your stack, sure, go right ahead, kind of sprinkle them in. But as a whole, there's nobody to really go to that isn't getting a ton of ownership. And so therefore, for me, it's just one of those things where if they end up burning me, they end up burning me. But the number of times that they do over a long sample size is just going to be significantly lower. You're better off going to some of these under-owned teams that are still in fantastic spots. I mean, 4.8 implied runs in Seattle. I can't say that enough, and I can't emphasize it enough. It's only 0.7 runs away. You have power and you have opportunity for all of those guys. It just makes a lot more sense for me to kind of go to that, make that my stand every single time. You could even go to like Milwaukee against Johnny Cueto in a terrible ballpark, terrible game environment, but Milwaukee has, a hitting catcher in Omar Narvaez, from the left side, 4.5K. Nobody's going to click on him. Colton Wong been on fire. Willie Adames, Christian Yelich, Avisal Garcia. Like, that's a great lineup. Rowdy Tellez, 2.6K. Going up against Johnny Cueto, I would much rather just play them and get away from all this gaudy San Diego ownership. I mean, there's so many teams that I can make a case for that it's hard for me to imagine getting even close to where the field is on 5-mans for San Diego.
All right, what about the Yankees? Here we have a team that's the third highest projected stack. They are cheaper. I mean, clearly with the roster change tonight. So there's that to factor in. But at the same time, they are not super owned by any means. Even if it's a small 2 points of leverage that you can work in your favor, you're countering a ton of the field if a couple of these cheaper options tonight come through. And it's not that big. Like, clearly there's something there that we have them at an 11.5% behind just Toronto and San Diego to be the top stack here. But if it's the roster, if it's just how cheap the other options are, people are not jumping on that tonight. And I'm inclined to say that's probably going to be one, if not my most owned stack, just because of that.
Okay.
But again, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm leading you.
I love it.
An answer.
No, I absolutely love it. I think there's a number of teams that we can be going to. I mean, you have pretty much 1, 2, 3, 4 teams that are just going to be a little bit tougher. So Milwaukee is actually getting a little bit of decent ownership in our last run. Let me refresh this one more time, just in case, so that I'm speaking with the most updated information, especially because I'm plugging in my lineups here now. But we have more than half the field. So, I mean, all the way, there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teams with negative leverage here in this spot. Arizona, Texas, pretty negligible. Milwaukee, even -2 there. Dodgers never really get as owned, especially on the back end of the lineup. And 1 through 8, they're in imposing lineups. So you can kind of avoid ownership, how you build your stacks that way. You're really saying San Diego, Toronto, do not kill me. Like, Toronto, I'm still going to play a little bit of. I find it hard for me not to get to a little bit of them. But San Diego, 25.3% ownership shares, 5-mans on DraftKings today. What are we doing if that's going to be kind of the route to take on a 9-gamer now? Like, it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't track. If it burns me, it burns me, and you move on to the next day. But over a long sample size, you want to make the best decisions every single day. You don't want to just say, oh, well, I think today is the day San Diego probably goes off. And that's kind of the thing that players like Alex, players like Steve Buzzard, these top end players, that's what they're taking advantage of, the things that they're unsure about. They just know they're playing a range of outcome game. They're not playing I think XYZ is going to happen game.
Right. It's a game of poker, man. Yeah, it's amazing. All right. So what about fading someone like, now, again, I'm not advocating that you stack up Baltimore all day or even to a lesser extent Washington. But if in fact Robbie Ray gets knocked around, my goodness, you are going to clear out half of the field from a pitching standpoint. And just look at Baltimore, not from a 5-man stack, but more so from just working a 3, maybe it's a 3-4-man stack, depending on how you're building these lineups. They're at the bottom. And again, I'm not making an argument that they're going to break the slate by any means, but even enough, like what would be a bare minimum to where Baltimore can do enough to knock Robbie Ray out of being the top pitcher? I don't think they need to put up 10 runs on him, but half of the field, as we mentioned, owns Ray. Is there any way that you can involve Baltimore in kind of that counter, knowing that it's almost like a parlay of circumstances? Not only does Robbie Ray have to suck, but Baltimore has to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I have 1% Baltimore 5-mans in 300 lineups. So that's what, three? No, I have four 5-mans in 300 lineups right now for Baltimore. I do have them scattered a lot as one-offs, and your main two one-offs are going to be Ryan Mountcastle, who is somebody just long-term to be invested in, and Trey Mancini and Anthony Santander as well. 3.6K. He shot a lot last year, and I don't think he was right. I don't think he was very healthy here. And another guy who could probably get advantage of it. I'm more inclined to go to some 2 and 3-man combinations of those 2 through 4. Put Austin Hayes in there as well if you want to. I really don't have any problem with it. 3.3 implied runs here I'm looking at here at the moment. It really comes down to, on this slate, is this going to be the team that you absolutely need to have? If you get, I think it's more often than not, you're going to get some one-off home runs from some of these guys. I doubt it's going to be something Robbie Ray's just been very, very good this entire season at a 31.6% K percentage. I'd rather be invested in that over the long haul here. Yeah, 43.4% hard hit percentage. There's definitely some one-offs here, but I just find it hard to believe that he's going to be the guy who ends up burning you on this slate. I understand the ownership, and I'm looking around. 50% on him is a large number. I'm not going to get to 50% of Robbie Ray, but I think getting to some one-offs of Baltimore on the other side, especially if you are going to be invested 50% or more Robbie Ray, is the way to go.
All right, so let's look at this too. I'm curious, same scenario, same application of numbers, same theory here, which is to counter a guy who's going to be heavily owned and a lot of expectations to just wipe off the Washington Nationals. It's a non-zero chance. It's low, but there's still, I've seen it where Zach Wheeler has crumbled. And if you were going to take advantage of that tonight, it would be to a lesser extent. You're not going to knock off as much of the field, but I feel like my point of it being is that even if it's 2 hitters, and it really is just 2 hitters down there, they stand a better chance. Like, I would double the chances of those 2 hitters to get to Zach Wheeler as opposed to the entire Orioles roster getting to Robbie Ray. Is that fair?
I talk about every single slate with Jose Ramirez and Franmil Reyes when they're on those. I talk about it every slate with Soto and Bell. I mean, if you're going to have damage in this lineup whatsoever, it's coming from those 2. They're elite hitters. Juan Soto specifically, just an elite hitter, 5.8K. What a great spot. You play 5% of him, and you're probably going to be over top of the field. His ownership currently on DK is 1%. And you're talking about Juan frickin' Soto. There's definitely always something to be said about that. Doesn't have to be a large lineup allocation. Maybe in a single entry, don't even do it. But in a 3-max, if you're trying to find a way to win this $5, Soto and Bell, I'm definitely way over the field on both. So I love that take.
All right, show sponsored by Jock Market. If you haven't heard, Jock Market has totally flipped DFS sports into the stock exchange. We've got the NFL right around the corner, golf just going on there. How about Patrick Cantlay? The best performance from a putter that I think you'll ever see, right? My goodness. I got to give our buddy Max credit because he called it after day 1, but I'm sure a lot of people are claiming that they credit it from, the jump there. I just wanted to wait and see. But that's all what you can do. My point in using this example is that if you saw, let's say, day 1's worth of hitting and putting and who led strokes gain from off the tee, then you would see that Patrick Cantlay would be a great option to pick up. So you can do this. You can treat players like stocks, and you just use the pregame IPO, use our promo code Awesemo. Imagine that. We have a promo code for you, Awesemo. $50 will match up to your first deposit, and it's just available for you, the Awesemo community. Awesemo for a $50 bonus. I am curious kind of in this middle range here, Eric, as far as stacks are concerned, and let's just flip it because there are 2 stacks that I wanted to get a little bit deeper of your thoughts on. First one is the one we've been talking about from everything else except their specific stack, and that is the Phillies tonight, because it does stand to reason that this would be a game in which Zach Wheeler can control, and the Phillies bats are going to get to Gray at some point. The stack is pretty much at the top of the middle or the bottom of the top tier, however you want to look at it. You do have a little bit of leverage because they're somewhat cheaper than some stacks above them. How much are you getting to the Phillies as a 4 or 5-man stack, 4 on FanDuel, 5 on DK?
I'm not getting to them a ton. I mean, I'm definitely going to have some I'm pulling them up here. I have 4% of them right now in 5-mans. I think that that's about fine. The key thing for me whenever it comes down to stacking this team is just to be invested in Bryce Harper, because if this team goes, you're going to need him. You're going to need McCutchen. Make sure you have him there. And then I always take Ronald Torreyes out of the lineup. I will never play Ronald Torreyes. I'm just talking these dudes into double dong games out of the middle of nowhere. But Ronald Torreyes, 303 expected slugging, 264 xWOBA. He's decent, and he's out there as a utility guy. I take him out. It's never once to burn me. It just hasn't. And so getting rid of him and making sure that you get to the core grouping of guys there. You can get to Marchand as a catcher, 2.5K. I really don't know what to make of him whatsoever here. 321 expected slugging doesn't look so good, but catcher is always pretty weak, 2.5K, whatever. But 1 through 6, that's what you're looking at with Philly. Make them your main investments. And that's my main thing is it's hard to find a different way to stack them up than just straight out playing the top of the order.
So from that standpoint, I'm wondering how much you're applying. And again, when you get to that Boston, Milwaukee, you touched on the Brewers, that middle range here, there's not going to be a ton of difference outside of just the eye test for an Arizona. Texas had a huge one, so I don't know how much they can continue that. But Atlanta, just looking at Atlanta, they're costly. They're definitely costly, and it's going to be a little bit of a deterrent. On the flip side, if we're looking at a team that's kind of in the middle of the top stack percentage, again, everything $29.95 a week for Awesemo Plus. You don't have to wait one day to get free tools and rankings for you. You can get them all at the drop of a hat. Atlanta is intriguing to me because I can still get workable leverage from them if I'm willing to pay down for a pitcher or possibly two.
If you're going to be investing in a good offense that's just not getting a ton of ownership, yeah, Atlanta makes a lot of sense. They have power everywhere in the entire lineup. Julio Orios is not somebody I'm going out of my way to pick on. Yeah, it's a little warm here in LA today, but nothing out of the ordinary. It's a fantastic power team. I have no problem getting to them. Looking at this lineup today, let's see. Yeah, you have Eddie Rosario, 2.4K. That's pretty cheap in the 8-hole even. I mean, 1 through 8, there's just guys with power everywhere. Jorge Soler, Austin Riley, Travis d'Arnaud, Dansby Swanson, Adam Duvall, all from the right side. Ozzie Albies, obviously, as well. Freddie Freeman hits both sides well. No problem playing a hitter of his abilities ever. So, reigning NL MVP, why not? I absolutely love getting to a team like an Atlanta when there's just no ownership, because all you have to do is play 3-4% of them. And you're way over the field, like gigantically over the field. And I'm just kind of chopping away at all this San Diego exposure that I don't have. And I can add it to a team like Atlanta. I can add it to a team like Houston. I can add them to all these different teams, scattershot across the board, and I get positive leverage everywhere. So I think Atlanta, they can definitely fall in the bucket of all these other teams that I want to play.
Is there anybody, as we look now, and we'll get some home run picks in here and a couple of K props. And again, you can go if you aren't already. I mean, my goodness. We have a free trial for you up there on the MLB player props, home run props, strikeout props. So you can use these for DFS standpoint as well as betting standpoints as well. It's an awesome tool that we have available for you. You mentioned a couple of specific one-offs to 2-man stacks that you can have. Baltimore was one that you got to. And let's look at it from this. Instead of it just being this wide open question, like to cut the crap and give me the best 2-man stack on the slate.
He's getting so much FaceTime today. It's nauseating, actually. We got to stop.
Okay, fair enough.
Like screen name time, I think would be the right word.
Yes, but FaceTime, whatever it may be. Malcolm Revamp, we got you in 1 second here. But before we hit that super chat from Malcolm, which is always appreciated, never necessary, but always the best way to get our attention. Is there a stack or two that you've talked yourself out of playing the 4-5-man stack that you like the most outside of Baltimore, since you mentioned them, that you really like the most from a 1 to even 2-man stack that you can run with tonight?
So, I mean, I talked about Soto and Bell. I think that those against a super chalky pitcher in Zach Wheeler, that makes a lot of sense just because of the quality hitters that they are. You don't need that much to be way over top of the field. You get to 5% Soto and you're going to be, 2, 3, 4, 5X the field. That's a good feeling on a guy like Juan Soto. Another 2-man that I've kind of like narrowed in on, Nelson Cruz, Brandon Lau as well from the Rays. Nick Pavetta, we've talked about him quite a bit. This Rays implied team total is actually up to 5 here. as I'm updating my sheet. I think that getting to those two specifically, guys who can create a lot of issues, Austin Meadows probably falls into that too. You could play any combination of 1 through whatever for the Rays. Mike Zunino on the other side, 9-hole catcher, 4.3K, but literally swinging for the fences at all times. Nick Pavetta is going to give up some hard contact here. We're just kind of hoping it's the right guys, but Nelson Cruz against anybody. I think that makes sense as another 2-man, him and Lau. Let's see, one more 2-man that I'm getting to quite a bit. Let me see if I can narrow it down. I'm going through my cruncher pool. Oh, okay. So this is an important one probably to talk about. Corey Dickerson and Alejandro Kirk. I have a 6-7 in a lot of lineups here. So we're talking about Toronto. They're pretty popular, especially Springer. I mean, Springer is hard to get away from, I think, on this slate. Somebody that's one of my higher exposed batters, and I think that it makes sense. But there's quite a few lineups where I have a chalkier build. If it has Dodgers, if it has San Diego, I am combining them. If I'm trying to just kind of find the high upside with some salary savings, Corey Dickerson's 3K out of the 7-hole here. I'm happy to get to them in this spot. Chris Ellis is just not a very good pitcher whatsoever. Baltimore, their bullpen behind them. While we're not targeting bullpens in a lot of spots, like specifically looking at the Yankees, I'd say, because bullpens are just difficult to really. Adam talks about it all the time on shows where bullpen games are not the most targetable things. Baltimore's bullpen is targetable. So Toronto, great spot for them, hard to get away from. But specifically, Kirk 6-man, and then getting to Dickerson in the 7-hole. Great combination, great little 2-man game that I'm playing in quite a few lineups. Like my main lineups that I have those two quite a bit.
Now I'm a little torn here because normally we'd tell Malcolm Revamp, hey, hit that notification bell so you can pop in right at the start of the show and you're not missing the top 2 pitchers and top 1 pitcher for DK, FanDuel, respectively, for Eric. But I'd be a hypocrite because Malcolm hit us up with a super chat, and you already know I am. So at least I'd admit that I'm a hypocrite.
Okay.
All right. So let's look at this. All right. Let's rewind. And on our way out, before we get some home run picks and a couple of K props here, your top 2 pitchers for DraftKings and the 1 pitcher you're rostering the most for FanDuel.
I'm not playing FanDuel today, but if I were playing FanDuel today,
lineups.
No, I all on DK today. I'm playing 100% on DK today. You're just fine. You're just fine. If I were playing over on FanDuel today, I mean, Robbie Ray at 10-9 is tough to get away from. I think I would have some exposure, but I really like, if I'm trying to get different, Luis Patino 7,700 over there. That's a guy that I think I would probably have in some large field stuff a little bit. Boston, very, very terrifying, but Luis Patino, you're looking for that quality start 6. It just feels like there's not a whole lot else down there. Pitching is very, very top heavy over there, but I'd be a little over the field on Patino, and I would be way over the field, way over the field on Corbin Burns at 11.5. Don't play either one of them in cash. I will say that. On DraftKings, if you're talking about for cash, I think it's pretty straightforward. I don't think you have to think about it all that much. You're playing Robbie Ray. You're playing Zach Wheeler. It's probably the most straightforward 2 DK plays. I like Corbin Burns a ton for tournaments. I wouldn't be willing against San Francisco 199 ISO. While I am siding more with Corbin Burns for tournament purposes, it's Robbie Ray, it's Zach Wheeler. It's not close. Those are your 2 cash game pitchers. My favorite one to play in tournaments, Corbin Burns, getting to him, playing some Josiah Gray. I'm kind of on board with that a little bit, looking over my lineups here. Luis Patino there as well. Nick Pavetta, 6,800. Luis Garcia, I'm pretty much not there. I think I need to probably go up a little bit considering his top 2 pitcher percentage is 15.4%. He's coming in under 10%. So I'm going to try to switch that in the next 9 minutes. But that's kind of what I'm seeing with the pitching board.
All right. Home run pick. And I already have one locked in that I used here on our player props combined with what's going on in real life. So I'll save mine because I know that's why everybody came, is to hear me blurt out some home run pick tonight. So how many home run bets have you placed tonight, Eric Lindquist? That is the question.
I mean, a lot in the DFS realm here. I should probably be jumping on the old tool. It was so nice being out in Denver there with Ryan because I was able to pretty much do whatever I wanted to all day, signed up for all the different books. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing. Back into the land of California here where DFS, yay, sports betting, no, bad. And so I'll drive to the Nevada border and do what I need to on certain times.
Give that state your money.
Yeah, Saturday night, going for a little drive, getting some of that done. Good times. But it's weird talking about home run picks from a DFS angle sometimes, because especially when I'm not betting them individually, it's like, who do I want to have home run is sometimes different from who I think, because a lot of the chalkier guys like Tatis and Machado, I would be like, oh, they're the most likely two guys that I would say to home run, but I don't want them to. That would be very, very bad for me. So I'm going to go to Yordan Alvarez would be fantastic. Ooh. Kyle Tucker would be fantastic. Both of them, absolutely love getting to them. Crazy amounts of power. Chris Flexen, not good at pitching baseballs long-term here. I like getting to them. So I'll give you both of them. That's another nice two-man. I should have led with them. That's a two-man that I play just all the time.
More so, is that just because you can maneuver and it's going to be a cost standpoint, or
super low owned? They're always under owned. I don't know why. Yordan Alvarez actually does garner quite a bit of ownership. He's not going to ever be under the radar. People know he's a good hitter. People know that he's got power, but Kyle Tucker for sure, always under the radar.
Is it chalk? Well, I should ask the chalk doctor, right? Like giving you a chalk play is like asking a bartender out for a drink, right? Like it's, you got to be creative here, right? I got to
appreciate you.
So I don't know. I'm going to give you Bryce Harper because you can get some pretty decent return on this thing. What I did to even take it a step further, I told you already that I love the Philadelphia Phillies on a money line play. If you find a book, and there are a bunch that will allow a same game parlay, I think you take the risk. You take the Phillies on the money line and you take Bryce Harper to hit home run tonight. And you can even go under 7.5 Ks for Wheeler if you really want to add it in there, because I was looking at his props and it's over 6.5 or under 7.5. And you can try and get that window if the book allows at 7 Ks. But I don't know. I wanted to look at Wheeler, but those two numbers, I think I'm staying away from.
God, St. Carquist, you're going to kill me, dude. You're going to kill me. You're going to get the ban hammer one time here. I love jumping an old tool. Yeah, you know what? It's a wrench next to my name. So I don't know. Maybe we got some news. Johnny Cueto scratched. Interesting. Are we on an NBA Live before lock? What's happening?
Well, hold on a second. Right. Now, how much is this going to change? How much Cueto did you have in the first place?
No, I didn't have much Cueto, but I got to imagine whoever's coming in there. Yeah, I had 1% Johnny Cueto, but I got to imagine whoever's coming in there. I mean, assuming that it's not going to be a starter, it's going to end up being bullpen, probably a little less intriguing. But I mean, Johnny Cueto was a good real life pitcher, been getting by here. Interesting. I just got to make sure I get him out of my pool, rerun some stuff, even like 2%. I don't want to go through and I can hand edit 6 lineups. And plus that game doesn't come on for a little bit here, but definitely an interesting thing as far as Milwaukee. So be on the lookout. Sometimes if you get a new starter, like say a lefty comes in there, you could see a reordered Milwaukee lineup. Just be on the lookout.
All right, my friend, as we wind down here, final couple of minutes before everything locks in, any final thoughts at all on a team, a stack, a pitcher that we didn't hit? Just want to make sure that we've cleaned the clock on everything.
All right. I understand San Diego is a tough team to get away from, but you just got to do it. You got to be lighter on San Diego. You can play some of these cats, especially back of the lineup. Go ahead and play these guys. They've got power everywhere. Jurickson, Profar, I'm not going to play, but there's a number of these dudes, Will Myers, Austin Nola, all in the projected lineup here. However it ends up coming out, I promise you, you should be lighter on them at their current ownership. It's a crazy amount of ownership. I would much rather play more Toronto Blue Jays if you're going to go to a chalkier offense. For sure, not close. Baltimore, terrible bullpen coming in, following them up after. And from a pitching perspective, play some of the ownership game. Robbie Ray, 50%. Get over the field if you want. Like, there's really no issue. He's the guy on this slate. Best spot. Baltimore has some sneaky power at the top of that lineup. You can have 2 mans of, but Corbin Burns, absolutely love him against San Francisco. Got to imagine better win equity for him, especially over on FanDuel where I talked about him here. It says Jose Alvarez is going to end up being the starter for him. Okay. So let me pull up his FanGraphs page while we're talking about it.
And we have time. Why not?
Yeah,
and we've got the time here. Asking.
I am. I'm getting the rest of my lineups in. Jose Alvarez, 32 here. Let's see. He's got 4 wins here on the season, 51 innings pitched. Let's see. What's his last starts look like? Let me see his DK page. All right. I'm not going to probably play I'm not going to play 2.12 ERA here on the season. I'm guessing that's mainly bullpen. So wait, hang on. 50 innings pitched, 51.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like.
It's a 34 case. He's not going to be viable. So that's kind of what we're learning there. My DK, I would pull him up on DK and just see if he's stretched out here or not super quickly, but I'm getting the rest of my lineups updated to account for the news. So quickly going to be doing that. And I apologize.
No, all good, my friend. And again, if any final thoughts here that I would just add, again, go to the player prop tools, and the strikeouts are usually the best, where you're going to find, or like Burns, for example, we have him at a 69% expected win to go over the 6.5 Ks. Just below that is Zach Wheeler to go over the 6.5 Ks. That's the number I like. Now, again, you're going to be laying juice on both of these. So it's all about winning a bet as opposed to winning a lot of money. Marquez, here's one that's interesting real quick on the way out.
Okay.
We have Marquez under 6.5 Ks, 65% chance of winning. Now, Marquez is definitely a popular guy on the slate. And this is one of these few props that does transfer to DFS. Like if you're striking people out in real life, you're going to get points in DFS for K'ing people. Under 6.5. A, do you like it? B, if you do, is that concerning?
It's not concerning. I mean, Marquez is a pitcher I generally am higher on than the field. Gets deeper into games, limits hard contact, and he keeps the ball on the ground. What a great combination to have in a pitcher, especially a pitcher who has to pitch a majority of his games in Coors Field. Going into Texas, that's obviously a better ballpark than he has in Coors Field for sure. Going to Arlington, I have no problem playing him in DFS, but I think 6.5 seems like a little bit of a lofty number on the season. 25% K percentage, that's solid, but there's some sneaky guys. Kiner Falefa, 13.6%. Yanni Hernandez is kind of the main guy, 12.5% K percentage, known as a contact dude back in the minors. So not a team to go crazy picking on from a K percentage, but definitely not a good baseball team.
All right. So last thing we need to hit, and I purposely left this until 4 minutes after the top of the hour. What time will you be eating chalk on Tuesday?
I'm assuming right at the top of the show. So 6 p.m. Eastern time, 3 p.m. Pacific. Can't wait to see you all there.
Is Josh aware of this?
He's going to be aware of it once I start eating it. And there's not a whole lot he can do to control what I'm doing on my side of the screen. So there's that.
All right. Well, thanks to Jordan, not only for producing, but monitoring the chat, which seems to be a problem way more with
it's
you.
A full-time job.
Well, yes, but I noticed that with you. Like Adam comes on, the boss comes on, Laffy, Rasa, like Lindquist comes on, and all of a sudden the haters come out, which I think is fantastic, by the way. I love that the haters come out for you.
I do not care. I love you all. I got to say, I get 99% love. It's just, sometimes somebody says something that's especially like, I don't understand what happened to you today, but I hope you're okay. Or maybe I don't, depending on whether you actually mean it or not.
Well, thanks to everybody. Reminder, 6:00 Eastern, you want to be tuned in to this channel for another edition of MLB Live Before Lock and Chalk Eating 101. I just want to tune in for Josh. I just need to see how Josh handles this whole thing. Make sure you follow Eric at Eric Lindquist. I'm at Shander Show. Thanks to Jordan, as always, for producing. Thanks to Jock Market. Make sure you check them out. Use our promo code. And make sure you are subscribed to everything that we have going on here. The channel, $29.99 a week for Awesemo Plus. Thank you all. Have a great night.